And we're off. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to EDU 617, Using Data to Improve Schools. As you saw from my introductory video, I'm Dan Lane. My real job during the day is that I'm the principal of Fayette County High School. I've been in the Fayette County school system for a long time, 26 of my 28 years, serving as a teacher, assistant principal, and now as principal in my 5th year as principal at Fayette County High. Interesting. I've worked with Thomas University for a couple of years now, and have taught both on the in the online environment and in the hybrid environment, and I like both of them for different reasons. Um, Tell me something a little bit about you, if somebody wouldn't mind. Are you in a cohort together? Are you taking all of your classes together? Somebody didn't mind talking. I'm not sure how this works in the online environment.
I'm not sure if we're all in a cohort together.
Okay.
Some of us have been in multiple classes together at different times. And then there's at least one person here I know that I personally have not been in a class with before. So
Okay.
I'm not sure how they do the mix and match.
All right, well, Betsy, thank you for explaining that. Most of my work has been in the Clayton Henry Fayette cohort, and so those students are all taking classes together, and so they've kind of formed this special bond, which has been kind of cool to see. It's a little bit harder to form that bond in the online environment, but we'll certainly try to do our best. I will use some of the interactive tools in Zoom to get you to interact with each other in breakout rooms, et cetera. So you'll see kind of how that will work. Before we begin, just a little bit of etiquette on using Zoom, and I'm sure you're old hat at it, but I do prefer that when you're on Zoom that you are muted unless you're talking. It doesn't bother me at all if you interrupt me. So if you've got something to say or you have a question, feel free to interrupt me and to jump in. I will periodically take some pauses where I will say, okay, we're going to pause here, and if there's any questions or responses, I mean, I certainly would want you to do that. I don't want us to lose the interactivity just because we're on Zoom in the online environment. So don't hesitate to interrupt me. I'm pretty easy to get along with, pretty even-tempered and good-natured. So feel free to interject, because a lot of you are already experts as well, and so I want to know what you've got to interject to the class, because you make that a lot more interesting. I see we have who just joined us on the phone. Is that Jessica?
Yes.
Hi, Jessica. And
Hello.
good to see you. Glad to have you with us. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'll pull up the PowerPoint for tonight. By the way, let's all kind of say a little prayer for Canvas as we're all learning to navigate Canvas differently. My school system uses Blackboard, and so I was very comfortable with Blackboard, and I know some of you are comfortable with Blackboard in previous classes, and the navigation to Canvas has been interesting. Just realized that I thought that my week 2 would come available for you last night at midnight, and I just realized that it did not. But it's there now. Week 2 and 3 is there now, and it has a little extra thing on the teacher side for Canvas that we're not used to, and that's having to publish everything. You have to publish it even though you're going to put an adaptive release on it. So I had the adaptive release that said to make it available at midnight last night, but I had not published it. So it is published now, and it is there for you. Let me share my screen, and we will get going. Let me pull up my Canvas first. All right, if you can see my Canvas, will you give me a thumbs up? Great. So I just want to prove to you, I'm in student view right now, so this is how it looks for you. Everything that was for this week, of course, was in this module, and then weeks 2 and 3 are here. I hope you understood in my my online introductory video that this course may be organized a little differently than you're used to. Basically what we do tonight, you'll have 2 weeks to work on the
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? I'm not muted. Did anybody else not be able to hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I can hear you loud and clear.
I can't
Okay.
hear you.
Uh-oh. Let me see.
You might need to check your computer, but I can hear fine.
Professor, yeah, I got you clear, loud and clear also.
Yeah, Betsy, I don't have any, I don't see any setting on my end that would cause you not to be able to hear. Let me open my chat so I can. Okay. Let's see. All right, I'm going to continue on. It is we are recorded, so if Betsy's got to go back. That may be a good advice from Teray to go and try to re-enter. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. There is the weeks 2 and 3. And so what we'll do tonight, you will have a follow-up activity from tonight, and that's what this first follow activity number 1 is. That basically all the follow-up activities are just reflections, asking you to reflect on certain things that we're doing in class. And then you'll have one major part of your major projects. If there are no tests in this class, it's just your major project, which is a big data project. This is the first step of the data project, and here's where you can access my my PowerPoint. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my PowerPoint up now, and let's see if I'm going to stop sharing, pull up the PowerPoint. Okay. I need to get a second monitor. That would make life a whole lot easier for me. Okay, so what we're going to be dealing with tonight, our essential questions this evening are what are the expectations of this course? We want to make sure that you're clear on that, even though we've you had the time to look at the introductory video. What will you need to do to be successful in this course? What is data? So we're going to come up with an operational definition tonight of data, because data is the essential piece of this course, of course. And what types of data are available in the educational arena. I'm assuming that all of you are teachers. I don't know that for sure. I will learn that when I watch all of your videos. But you certainly use data and have your own understanding of data, but there's tons of data that is available today in the educational arena. And so it's very important that you learn to know what some of that educational data is. You may not have had any type of access to some types of data that are out there, but you will learn about that in this course, and hopefully you'll get your hands a little dirty with the data that's school-wide, not just stuff that you do in your own classroom. How is that data used in the educational setting? We'll answer tonight. What is change theory? We'll talk a little bit about that. You read an article from John Cotter, who is a change theorist. We'll talk a little bit more about that article and what role does educational data have in viable educational change initiatives. You know, school improvement by definition is change. A lot of people out there don't like change. I understand that, but for a change initiative to be successful, there are certain things that have to happen. And so John Cotter talks about some steps that have to happen in order for a change initiative to be successful. And we're going to talk a little bit about those and ways that data is used to mitigate some of those barriers that he talked about in the article. And how is data categorized in order to maximize its effectiveness in change processes? Just looking at aggregate data is really not enough for lasting school change. So we'll talk about ways to disaggregate data, to pull it apart, to look at it in different categorizations so that you'll begin to see some trends and different types of data that are available. What repositories are used to house educational data, and there's a lot of them out there. And so this is our course framework. Just as a reminder, the way this course is going to be organized, week 1 and week 8 are standalone, okay? Weeks 2 and 3 are together, 4 and 5 are together, 6 and 7 are together. You will have these a follow-up assignment after each synchronous class. And that, like I said earlier, that follow-up assignment is usually just a reflection. So it's not major research or anything like that. I'm just asking you to reflect on what you've learned in the class and what are your logical next steps if you're going to become this educational leader, this teacher leader, for your school. What are some logical next steps that you could take to help support the leadership of your school? You're all in a teacher leader program. I do understand that you're not all training to be administrators. Some of you, though, might take that pathway at some point. But it's very important to me that you kind of understand this greater worldview of how is data used from a more global standpoint than what you do just in your classroom. So I kind of want you to think in that mindset is that you are a teacher leader. Many of you, I'm sure, are on the leadership team. If you're not on the leadership team, this would be some wonderful data or a wonderful class for you to have some skills that you could take to your leadership team to help improve your own school. Very interactive. And so I want you to use your school's data so that you can come up with something that will be very meaningful for your school. You'll see that for weeks 2 and 3, we're going to talk about what is data, how is it used, and where do you find it. You'll go on a data hunt for the next 2 weeks, looking for all that different data that may be out there. It's kind of a data scavenger hunt. And I'm not asking you to actually collect all that data at this point, so I want to be clear about that. I'll talk more about it towards the end of the evening. But you're just going to be looking for all the different types of data that's out there. Weeks 4 and 5, we'll talk about once you got that data, how do you take that data and put it in a usable form, in something that's easy to recognize, easy to see, easy to understand, and can tell the best story. And then we'll also talk about how data is used for school improvement. There's a whole mass of protocols that we'll use, and I will ask you to do a data simulation protocol with some stakeholders. I'll ask you to do something with some teachers in your school. I understand we're at the end of the year for most of us, but I'll ask you to pull somebody together and go through a data protocol with that person. I'll talk more about that in 2 weeks. How do we use data? Weeks 6 and 7 are about using data to tell a story, and how do we use data to tell a compelling story about our school? Data alone does speak, but it's when you take data and put it in context of a story that it really becomes the most powerful. And you're going to see an example of that later tonight. And then week 8, you will actually do a data presentation for our class. I'll be asking you to share your screen and take over the role of teacher and do a short 10-minute data presentation of what you discovered doing this for the class. This is one of your GACE performance tasks, is being able to create a data presentation, and so this aligns perfectly with the GACE performance tasks. Okay, I'm gonna pause there, and if anybody has a question or a comment for me, I'm gonna pause there and let you interject.
Can you tell us like specifically what data we're gonna need, because we're ending school? Obviously, like if I could do it this week, I'll probably get it. Later than that, I don't know.
Yes, if I can put you off, Beth, a little bit for about an hour, and then you're going to see an example of a data presentation that's very comprehensive, and you'll see all the different types of data. And Beth, honestly, I'm not going to limit you with the data that you're going to use. I'm not going to tell you specifically, because you're going to use the data that would best tell the story of your school, okay?
Can it be like a subgroup, because I'm an ESL teacher and we just got like access scores? Can it be like telling the story of the L's at our school?
It can be, but I do want it to be more from the macro level, not just micro level of the data that you might use as an ESOL teacher. I certainly think that when you disaggregate that data, and you might want to talk about how your ESOL population is doing, but I want your data presentation to be more about school improvement for the entire school, not just your ESOL population. You can certainly pull that in, but I want you to look at the larger picture as well, okay? But I will show you a data presentation that shows you lots of different types of data that you could possibly use. Again, guys, I don't want to limit you. I'm not going to tell you that I want you to use specific types of data, that I want it disaggregated this way, because you need to tell the compelling story. And if I get very prescriptive about it, then you don't tell the best story. You end up telling my story. And I don't want you to tell my story. I want you to tell your story. So, but you bring up a very good point, Beth, and that is the fact that you are getting close to the end of school. And so I would go ahead and make contact. I think I mentioned this in the video. Go ahead and make contact with the person in your school that has the access to most data, because you'll need to let them know that you're taking a class and that you'll be using data just for class. Now, you won't put any personally identifiable information in your data presentation, so you won't be able to identify any specific students. So if there's concerns about FERPA, I understand those concerns. There won't be anything that would be that would violate FERPA. Most data is readily available. A lot of data is readily available online, but it's aggregate and disaggregate data, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. But I would go ahead and make that contact and say, at least find out what kind of data is available at your school. Now, there is no way that you can use every bit of data that's available at your school. We're going to talk tonight about DRIP, data rich, information poor. And that is really the case. There is so much information that's available right now that you've got to be able to dig through that. So I would go ahead and make contact. In fact, that's what the first part of the data scavenger hunt is, to make contact and make a list, catalog a list of all the data that is available. Of course, there's data that's available online. We'll talk about that tonight. But there's other things that you keep just in your school, and it's going to be different for every school. You know, your principal may have discipline data that he reviews, or attendance data, or faculty attendance data. I mean, there's just so much that I really can't give you a comprehensive list. We're going to brainstorm tonight so you can see what might be available, but in no way, shape, or form am I expecting you to use all of it. Okay? And I'm sorry, that was a much longer answer than you expected with your question, Beth. I apologize. Anybody else before we move on? Can I answer any questions or any comments? Well, this is one thing I'm going to miss about being in the hybrid format, is the interaction back and forth. So please don't hesitate to interact, because I certainly enjoy that. I'm a very relational person, and so sometimes I need that feedback that you're with me and not asleep on the other end of the internet. Grading, just as a reminder, we will have 8 discussions. You'll have a discussion every week. The discussions are often things that are asking your opinion on a certain topic. And you will need to respond to 3 classmates. Consistently, your response will be due on Saturday evening, and your responses to your classmates are due on Monday. I'm used to teaching on Wednesday, so I've got to kind of get used to this new format for myself. So that will be consistent across the board every week, and they're worth 10 points each. There is a rubric I will use to evaluate. I won't use that for the first one because it doesn't really apply to your introductory video. If you did the introductory video, congratulations, you made 100. But as far as the other discussion posts do, there will be a rubric. In fact, I will go ahead and post all of my rubrics in one folder for you on Canvas. I just haven't had a chance to do it yet. I'm learning how to translate all of my rubrics from Blackboard over into Canvas, but I will get them there so you can see all the rubrics, because everything I assess with a rubric. Follow-up assignments, as I said, there's one after each of our 3 main synchronous classes. Remember, that last synchronous class is actually just your presentations. I won't be doing the teaching that night. You will be. So there won't be a follow-up assignment that night. And then your final project, there are 4 component parts to the final project. Now, this is not a final project where you're going to do everything at the end, and I want you to understand that up front, that I divide this final project into the steps that you will need to do to complete this project successfully. And so the data hunt, we will do this the next 2 weeks. It's a big chunk of time, and I want you to understand that I did that on purpose to give you the 2 weeks, because you're going to have to do some digging. And so instead of me giving you 2 weeks worth of work, a synchronous week work and then an asynchronous week of work, you're going to do it all over the 2 weeks. But it's a big chunk. But once that's done, then you're in good shape for the next part, which is to actually take that data and collect the data and then put it in a visual form. And then you're going to do that protocol for school improvement planning. and then your final presentation. And each of those will be assessed separately. If you have problems along the way, if, for example, I don't think your data hunt is comprehensive enough, then I'm going to have a conversation with you. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to do it again, or to add to it, to expand it. So, the whole point here is by the time you get to your final presentation, that you have a comprehensive look of your school and look at your school. And we're going to make sure that you do that. So don't panic if you don't think it goes that well. I'm all about giving you more opportunities so that you can all be successful. I want you to all be successful and all do well. And so if I give you the feedback that I need more, whatever grade I assessed then will change after you go back and do more, okay? Final presentation, let's talk about that very quick.
I have a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
This can be used for one of the GACE tasks, correct?
It can't be used for a task, but it's aligned to the GACE task. So what you are doing, you will do similarly on the GACE task.
So we should look at that and see what we wanted to do with that task, so then we know what data we should be collecting, correct?
You are so smart in the way that you are thinking there. Absolutely. Yes. If you want to go ahead and look at the GACE task and then decide if that what you're doing for this class will fit right into it, then absolutely more power to you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're definitely on the right track with that one.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments before I talk about the final presentation? All right. You're actually going to do the final presentation twice. The first time you're going to do it, I'm going to ask you to pull a stakeholder group together, and I put the word group in quotation marks. That could be one person. It might be your principal. It might be your assistant principal. It might be another teacher that teaches on your class. I'm getting a lot of background noise. Can somebody mute for me? If you're not muted, will you mute for me? There, thanks. So you're going to need to do the comprehensive presentation. You will do a larger presentation. You will create this larger presentation that should be about 30 minutes, and you will give that presentation to somebody in your school that's a stakeholder group. You can decide who that is, and I'll talk more about it in a couple of weeks. But it will need to be given for the people that could best you could best impact for change. And I'll ask you to video that presentation and upload the link to that video, and I will watch that video. That's what I will assess for that 35 points. But then I would like you to do an abbreviated version of it for class, in about 10 minutes. So basically, you'll do the big part first, and then take some of the stuff out of the big part, and then give us an abbreviated version that you will share with class. The class won't have time to watch 30 minutes of video of all 9 of you that are in the class. That would be too much time for me to devote to this for you. I'll watch them, but I can't ask you to do that. But the 10-minute overview, we'd like to see just kind of the highs and lows of what you found in your data hunt. So don't panic about that yet. You've got some time. Okay. Questions? Go ahead.
Is it a video of us giving it to the principal, or can we video ourselves and then email it to her? Because again, this will occur after school.
I would prefer it be you giving it to the principal. Now, if you want to do it via Zoom, and because part of the presentation is to allow them time to ask questions and answer questions, I'd like to see that. But you've got a Zoom account. You can set up a Zoom meeting with your principal if you'd like to, or an assistant principal or another teacher. But I want there to be some interactivity about it so that they can ask questions of what they saw, because that's part of the school improvement process. Okay. I don't want you just to make a screencast and send that screencast to him.
It's just at a tricky time because it's summer and people are traveling and childcare. It's just a hard thing. Like, I didn't know this going into this class. Well,
and that's why I'm very lenient about who you actually do that, who you call a stakeholder, because I understand that. This class is moving from summer by that I actually asked that to move it from summer for this very reason, so that you do have access to your data. But I've taught it twice now during the summer, and you can come up with someone to give your data presentation to. That will meet you for coffee, and you do your presentation for 30 minutes. But just some stakeholder group. But you will be the last group that takes this class during the summer. Okay. Any other questions or comments about how you're graded before we move into content? All righty then. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what is data. If you are a Star Trek fan, you know that data from the Urban Dictionary was an android from the 24th century. Well, that is not the data that we're talking about. Yes, I have a very poor sense of humor, so just humor me. Act like you're laughing, and it'll help. I'd appreciate that. Thank you for the humoring me. All right, dictionary.com says a collection of individual facts, statistics, or items of information. And that is true. But in this class, as I mentioned, the idea of telling story is going to become so important to us. And so we're going to take those individual facts and merge them together so that we can tell a comprehensive story of your school. And again, I'm going to show you an example this evening. Okay. Incidentally, this is just no extra charge for this little bit of a nugget of wisdom here. Data is the plural form of datum. And so data is always plural. And so it should be, whenever you use the word data, you should use it with a plural verb. So it should always be data are, not data is. And you see, even in what I put, it says data is. Datum is the singular form. So if you're ever on Jeopardy and they ask you this question, now you know that data is really a plural word all the time. However, it's one of those things that in English has been used so incorrectly for so long that it really has become acceptable to use data as in singular form. So you can see my examples there. It should say the data were not conclusive instead of the data was not conclusive. And when I was in my doctoral program, had several teachers that were very, very much sticklers about using that plural verb when using the word data. I'm not that stickler, but I want you to know the truth. It really is plural, and we kind of use them interchangeably now. All right, so let's talk about the data that are available here. What I would like you to do, if you will, open up todaysmeet.com/data brainstorming. And I would like you on today's meet is to please log in, and you'll just need to put your nickname, your first name is fine, and then just brainstorm on, and I'm going to pull it up on the board, brainstorm some different types of educational data that you know is available. Okay, see demographic data. It's today's meet /data brainstorming. Now, can you see my today's meet, or do you still see my PowerPoint?
See the PowerPoint.
See the PowerPoint. Okay, that's what I thought. Stop share, and we're going to reshare. Okay, so when you get there in today's meet, just put your first name for nickname, and then different types of data you know are available. Good, attendance data. Discipline data, very good. State test data, good. So lots of that. End of grade, end of course, which is milestones data, access data, free and reduced lunch data, very good. IEP goals, great. Learning data. There's a whole lot more out there. Keep going. Behavior data, good. Lesson plan data, okay. You can perception data, very good, Betsy. Different types of how people think about whatever. Keep going. What is some data that you collect in your own class or that you use in your own classes? Socioeconomic data, very good. That goes right along with our free and reduced lunch. Progress monitoring data, very good. Student learning data along the way. Reading level data, great. Lexile levels, etc. I added formative assessment data, how students are doing when you assess for learning. Standards-based mastery, good, good. Fitnessgram data. Stevie, are you a PE teacher?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's a lot of other people may not know what Fitnessgram is. So good. Teacher retention data, very good. Retention rate, excellent, excellent. Common assessment data, very good. So in your PLCs, there's more. Keep brainstorming. Math and reading inventories, good, like SRI. Map assessment, all right. Mentor-mentee data, interesting. Comprehension data, good. What about more about the teachers in your building? What kind of data could you collect on the teachers in your building? They've got DA screening, okay. The years at the school, their educational experience, right? Their levels of degrees, their length of service, great. Years in the profession, excellent. What about the school itself? What kind of data could you collect on your school itself? Okay, how many are endorsed in different areas? That's great. Teacher demographic data, great. Graduation rate, very good. Who's endorsed, different ways. Okay, we've got attendance. What about the school building? Can you do anything? Can you collect any data about your school building? I'm talking the facility itself, okay? Cleanliness data. I'm not sure how you collect that data. I don't know if there's a test for cleanliness. The white glove test, I guess, maybe. All right. The square footage, absolutely great. Student-teacher ratio, that's a good point there too. How many people are in trailers? All right, I agree that. Your interface and technology, great. So whether you about your digital infrastructure, the number of labs, excellent. Class size. Your budget, there you go. Now you're thinking, how many have smart boards or Promethean boards? Your amount of technology that's available. The cost to operate. There's actually a new CCRPI rating called financial efficiency rating that goes with that. Maintenance costs, very good. Technology, the number of desks or tablets. If you're a one-to-one school, your Title I data certainly is there. Very good. Now you're thinking, what about school lunch besides free and reduced? Can you collect any data about school lunch? Okay, the amount of waste, sure. Nutrition info, great. The number of students who are eating on a daily basis, excellent. Lack of nutrition, okay. The satisfactory, that could be perception data. Vending machine sales, number of calories, very good. Where the food comes from, I think that's excellent as well, good. What about your families that your school serves? Somebody mentioned demographics, but let's break that down a little bit. What kinds of things would be included in demographics? All right, ethnicities. How many come from single parent homes? Very good. Cultural data. ESOL, the language is spoken. Very good. There's a report that your school has to do at the end of the year where you identify all of those different languages that are spoken. The number of adults in the household. Homelessness. Very good. How many are on that are considered homeless? The poverty level. Okay. That could be there's different types of metrics for that. How many times the social worker has to be involved? Very good. College educated or not? Food needs outside of school hours, very good, especially during the summer months. I know some schools have a backpack buddies that helps with that. Who works? Parents with post-high school education, very good. Let me see if I can think of anything else. What about athletics? If your school has an athletic program, what kind of data can you collect on your school's athletic program? Mental health data, very good. All right. performance of student athletes, who participates. You could do there's a report that we have to do each year that's a gender equity report on who participates, right? Concussions, the health of those, right? And there is a concussion report. The number of athletic programs, the grade point average of student athletes, so that would be interesting. Scholarships and how many are recruited by colleges, how many are signed each year. Excellent. Good ideas. There's recruitment again. I agree. The time missed from class to participate. Interesting. ACT and SAT scores of student athletes, or in general, that's great. What about post-secondary data? What kind of data could we collect on our graduates? Funding for athletes, good. Those who have means for travel to and from events, excellent. How well the kids perform in college. The students who complete 4 years of college, good. College readiness, there is a metric for that, the number that are attending college. Our SPED population and how they're doing, great. Their salary after graduation, wow. That'd be tough to collect, but that would be very interesting to see. And do they return for homecoming? Okay, we could collect that data. Types of employment, the ratio of 2 to 4 years. Trade school versus 4 years, absolutely. It's good stuff. Anything else you can think of? It's a pretty exhaustive list. Versus military, good. Financial aid, the type of financial aid. I think somebody mentioned scholarships earlier. That's great. And the students who return to education. Wow. In Fayette County, where I live, we're an aging community, and so there's a lot of emphasis right now on why people like millennials are not moving back to Fayette County, and it's concerning because there's not as many young families here as there used to be, and some of it is because it's expensive to live here, I'm sure. But it's an interesting conversation. Do kids like or feel ready for college? So some perception data, excellent. All right. Well, all of this long list that we just created. What's your reaction to that? What do you think about all of those things that we just created?
Some of the materials is easy to collect versus others that can be more difficult and time consuming, which can then lead for the inability to actually analyze the data.
Okay, that's a good point, Kevin. And one thing that I really like what you said, you talked about how some of the data is very easy to collect and some of the data is not easy to collect. Thinking from a school accountability standpoint, does that idea resonate with you for school accountability, Kevin?
Coming out of an instructional coach position, yes, because there's a lot of data that I had to collect. Oftentimes teachers were asking why. Why are we collecting this data? What's the means behind this? Are we using it? And then we'd use some PD on them understanding the importance of it. And then when we were able to turn our school around, some of that made a difference. But then there was also aspects of it that after analyzing all the data with the background that I have, some of it didn't make a change when you looked at it closely, when you really started breaking it down into the subcategories.
That's interesting.
So, but each school is obviously different. So some of it I find very important, versus some of it I find not necessarily as important when we're coming to accountability. And some of it I think needs to take into account for more points than what our CCRPI data actually gives it.
I agree with you completely, and that's kind of what I was trying to get at in baiting you with this question, is that when you look at CCRPI, is CCRPI mostly easy data to collect or not easy data to collect?
I come from Pennsylvania, and CCRPI is, to me, like one of the most ridiculously thought up things. Just for the simple
How
fact,
do you really feel? I'm sorry, go ahead.
just for the simple fact that you can get this data and make these points out of anything, and it's almost, to me, it's almost like oddly weighted data that you can almost make up or you can find somewhere, or it's just an odd concept to me. I don't think it's very fair across the state. I don't think it's fair across the schools, even schools in the same county. definitely beneficial to counties that have more money, because you can have more AP classes, meaning you can get those bonus points to help your CCR. It's pointless to me. We had AYP. I mean, if you didn't make it, then you got on probation. The state would help a little bit. Your school didn't fully get taken over. I worked, my student taught in Chester, south of Philadelphia. It's one of the worst cities to teach and work in. The teachers weren't getting paid. I mean, they never knew when their next paycheck was coming in. That school had been broke since like the I want to say like 30 some years. The state never fully came in and took over it, but they never met AYP, but there wasn't this odd data set. So I don't think it's fair. It's an odd thing to come into from Pennsylvania.
I was going to say too, I think it's kind of crippling. I know at the previous school where I was, they pushed college and career readiness so much in terms of student graduation that even though there were technical, options for the kids, they wouldn't really even make them available to students or really kind of tell them about it unless they were students that had large attendance issues or became behavioral issues, and that kind of became like their way of pushing them into one of those classes. But and I had actually inquired about it, and what they said was it had something to do with the scoring for CCRPI. It looks better if you're pushing college and career readiness versus the technical route. So they don't tell they don't really push the students or tell the students about that even being an option. So in that aspect, I think it is crippling, because I feel like with some students that know that they're not going to necessarily go to college or want to go to college and may not have the means to go to college and may have to pay, why not offer them an opportunity, or let them know that there are other options out there besides that path, at least right away. And Beth, I see you shaking your head because it came about mostly with when I was working with ESOL students, because many needed to work to help like support families and things like that, but they were too also put on the same path as the other students. And with the college and career readiness, ESOL students still have to take the foreign language for 2 years,
Right.
which is kind of crazy if they're learning English. Like, I always wanted to know why they couldn't have English, since they're learning English as their secondary language, on that aspect of it. But yeah, that's my spill. Sorry, I'll stop talking now.
That's okay. I appreciate it. Anybody else want to chime in?
One last thing about the data. You can manipulate what you're doing in the schools to adjust to the CCRPI. With school grades, it's very, I shouldn't say easy, but it's a certain way of looking at the data. You can adjust who you're spending more time remediating, so to speak, to get those improvement scores.
So
it's as an educator and a classroom teacher, it's disappointing. But everybody looks at your school grade at the end of the day.
yeah, and you're absolutely right. There are those that play the game. It's not that way anymore. With ESSA coming in, the CCRPI has changed. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but the 2017 CCRPI will be different than. It's a lot more streamlined than the last CCRPI was. It doesn't have as many things that you can earn those bonus points for, et cetera. I used to laugh about that the number of times you clicked the SLDS, you could get a half a bonus point if you clicked so many times. And I heard stories of principals, telling teachers to bring your laptops into the faculty meetings. And while you're in the faculty, I see a thumbs up there from Betsy. Uh-oh. Okay, you don't have to tell on yourself now. That's okay. Well, just to earn that stupid half a point. I never did that.
We were all very happy when we were told that we no longer had a clicking requirement.
A clicking requirement.
We did.
Wow. Well, I never made my faculty do that, but what a ridiculous thing. I do like, I will say just from the principal standpoint, again, no extra charge for my own opinion. But from a principal standpoint, I like that the CCRPI is a more comprehensive look at the school than just how you do in math and English. And AYP was just math and English. And, you know, we sort of took a little step back now. You know, our accountability right now is back to math and English, even though we have end of grade and end of course milestones tests. The actual accountability part for ESSA is just math and ELA. And I think that's a step backwards for Georgia. But I do understand exactly what Tori was talking about. You know, I get it. And and from Jessica's point about how it looks different from other states, I get that too, because there were some ridiculous things in there. Back to Kevin's point about there being some data that's easy to collect and data that's not easy to collect. One thing that we all know as educators is that at school is a extremely complex organization. And the way that we interact with students, the way that students interact with their family, the way that the environment affects what goes on in school is extremely complex. And it can't be described with a few data points, even though that's what the CCRPI tries to do. I mean, you as teachers, when I was mentioning accountability, I was hoping somebody would pick up about you as teachers. You know, you get a TAP score and you get a teacher effectiveness measure score on TEKS. But there's so much more, teaching is so much more complex than what we evaluate even on TEKS. And I don't think anybody even put TEKS on our list there. I can't believe you didn't do that at this time of year when everybody's getting summative assessments and all that stuff. I can't believe I didn't do it because I was in like 6 summative assessments today with my own teachers.
We try not to think about it.
You just kind of put it out of your mind. It's over. It's done for another couple of months. Okay, I can buy that. But what you do as a teacher is so much more complex than what we can quantitatively show in TEKS or in the CCRPI, because there's a lot of qualitative stuff that's not easily measured. And you know, the legislature, again, I'm going to give you my opinion, no extra charge. The legislature thinks because they went to school that they can that they know about school and can manage school and can tell you what's best for school. And that we know that's not really true because it's so much more complex. But they look at some of those metrics that are easy to collect. It's easy to collect achievement data. Don't get me wrong, achievement data is important. It's easy to collect attendance data. So let's put it in the CCRPI. It's easy to collect discipline data. Well, but there's a lot of story behind what goes on in the what goes on behind that discipline data. For example, you know, if you look just at a snapshot of discipline data, your discipline data may not look good. But if you look at 3 years worth of discipline data and you've seen that you've made improvements because you've become a PBIS school, that's what tells the story. But you don't really get that story told in your CCRPI. And that's what's frustrating to me as a principal, that we sometimes want to do the stuff that's easy to collect, not the stuff that truly is meaningful.
Or even break it down to a student. For instance, we have one that last year spent so many days in ISS, and this year he's had only 1 referral. And you're not going to find that piece to go to someone that's most improved because you're not going to see that.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. It's a very, very good point. All right. By the way, I didn't mention it, but if you ever need to take a restroom break, we're adults. Just go. Do what you need to do. I will break. I will take a break about in the middle, where we'll all take a break. But if you need to, do what you need to do. It's not a problem. I don't get my feelings hurt easily. I promise. All right. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint now. All right, I mentioned earlier about DRIP, about being data-rich, information-poor. I'm sorry, I keep looking to the side because that's where you are, where I see your heads. And I'm used to talking to people, not talking to a webcam. But I'll keep trying to look forward. But data-rich, information-poor is a concept of that where there is so much data, so overwhelming, as one of you mentioned, that it doesn't tell a story, that you've got to be able to dig through that data to figure out what would be the most impactful. And as we talked, wonderful conversation, and I appreciate you participating. Sometimes the data we collect is not the data that tells the best part of the story. So that kind of gets me back to Beth's question that she had earlier about, what data do you want me to have? And well, I can't really tell you because I want you to get your hands dirty and find out what data is out there so that you can tell the most compelling story about your school. Because I don't want this to be you're not just creating another CCRPI. I want you to create something that will tell a compelling story about your school. All right, there are many ways that we categorize data, and I'm going to zip through this kind of quickly because I'm sure most of this is stuff that you've heard before. But if I need to expound on it, please stop me and just let me know, interrupt me. All right, so data can be characterized as quantitative or qualitative. If you stay in this field and you do more research, of course, as you do research methods for a dissertation, you will either have a quantitative method research or a qualitative. Qualitative being it's described by numbers, obviously, and quantitative means it's described by anecdote. So quantitative, I think I just said that backwards. I apologize. Quantitative data, quantity, described by numbers. Qualitative data, quality, described by anecdote. And so there are different ways that we collect these different types of data. Quantitative data, those are the numbers. Those are the easier things to collect. That's why if you ever want to write a dissertation, if you do the quantitative data, you'll be done a lot faster than if you do a qualitative study. Because qualitative study is usually collected through perceptions, through interviews, and things like that. But both are important to telling a true story, to have both quantitative data and qualitative data to back it up. Leading versus lagging data. Our leading data is data that you get at the beginning of a process. Lagging data is data you get at the end of a process. So for example, the milestone scores, you are getting milestone scores, end of course, end of grade back right now. That is lagging data. It happens after the fact. It really can't impact school improvement too much because it's really already happened, okay? Do we use it to describe school improvement? Sure we do. And we compare how our kids did on this year's Algebra 1 milestones versus last year's Algebra 1 milestones. But you know what? Those weren't the same group of kids. And so is it really a good comparison? Because those kids who took last year's Algebra 1 end of course milestone are taking geometry milestones now, okay? Leading data is data that happens before the fact. It may be some data that you can use to help plan an initiative. It could be data like Lexile score data. That could be leading data. You're looking at that data before you plan an initiative having to do based on that data that's available to you. So Lexile score data would be leading data, that happens before a school improvement initiative. Lagging data would help you evaluate whether or not a school improvement initiative was effective. So you put in PBIS, you then look and see how PBIS did in your school. That would be lagging data. Aggregate versus disaggregate data. Aggregate data, of course, is things that are aggregate together, like your entire school, taking all of your school and looking at your entire school together. That's aggregate. If you take that aggregate data and dissect it into its component parts, and you look at just Black students, for example, that's disaggregate data. Students with disabilities, disaggregate. ESOL students, disaggregate. Gifted students, that's disaggregate. So aggregate is pulled together, disaggregate is pulled apart, okay? Both are important. AYP, by the way, since we've been on the AYP discussion, AYP was really the first thing that made schools start looking at disaggregate data. Because back with AYP, not only did you have to meet your annual yearly progress for the aggregate data, you had to meet it for all of your subgroups as well. And so it forced schools to begin to look at how not just your students did in general, but how each of your subgroups did. And so that brought a lot of attention specifically to students with disabilities. And so that's when there were lots of changes made to IDEA because of that, because we saw, boy, our students with disabilities were really lagging behind our students without disabilities. And so that is important for us to look at both aggregate and disaggregate data. There's microdata and macrodata. The microdata is data that you probably use for your classroom. That's data about a specific student would be microdata, but data about a large group, a whole class, or about a whole school is macro data. So micro and macro is kind of self-explanatory. Snapshot. Well, let me back up for 1 second. There's also a thing today called big data. Big data is very much Big Brother-ish. Because we're all connected now with our phones and our laptops and all, there's a lot of data that's being collected about you, your browsing history. It's always kind of freaky to me when I have gone onto Amazon and I'm looking at something on Amazon, and then I go and I'm looking at Facebook, and an ad pops up in Facebook that's the same type thing that I was looking at on Amazon. That's big data that's being collected about you. There's a lot of controversy going on in the world right now about what happens to this big data that's being collected about you. What are companies doing with this big data? Are they selling this big data because they want to see your browsing history and stuff like that? There is big data that's being collected about schools as well. So if your school has your own wireless network, there's data that's being collected about where your students, where they search, what their browsing history is, what educational software is being used most prevalently. That's all big data, and it's just a massive amount of data that's being collected, and it's kind of interesting about whether or not that's an invasion of your privacy to collect all that data about your browsing history and where you go and stuff like that, and will that ever surface? Well, I don't know. Snapshot data versus historical data. Snapshot data is what we see right now. Historical data, obviously, is what happens over time. Kevin's example about the student who was in ISS many days in the past, but this year has only had one referral. If you look at snapshot data of just last year, that student doesn't look good at all. If you look at snapshot data this year, he looks pretty good. But the best story is historically, where you look and see how that student has changed over years. Traditionally in the school environment, we look at 3 years worth of historical data. I like 5 years. I try to work on a 5-year cycle of data with my own school. But 3 years typically will give you a pretty good understanding of how a school's doing. You can see trends within 3 years. So the snapshot data doesn't let you see trends. Historical data does. Well, there's small data versus big data. I got ahead of myself. Talking about big data being those small data is the data that we use on a daily basis. Big data being all those browsing history things that are being collected that we don't even know how much is collected about us. I mean, the fact that we're online right now, our facial recognition is being collected and stuff like that. I mean, it's pretty staggering stuff that could be collected. So how do we use data in the educational arena? Well, lots of different ways. Of course, you use it in class. There are lots of ways that we use data. We use it because it provides empirical evidence. Instead of us just relying on anecdote, I think we improved. I think that this reading strategy that we've been doing in our ELA classes, I think it improves it. Well, if we actually go to the data, then we've got empirical evidence to prove that yes, there was a causal relationship between an initiative that we put in and a result that we got. It also helps us track progress. Somebody mentioned progress monitoring for RTI. Exactly, it does. It helps us track progress. It helps us see through, especially when you look at the historical aspect of data collection, you can see whether we're making improvements or whether we're making declines or whether we're remaining stagnant or the same. It does track progress. Is it perfect? No, it's not, but it does help us tell a compelling story. Accountability, the big A word. It does help us become accountable through CCRPI, through TEKS, through leaks. I'm evaluating with leaks. LKES, same kind of thing. So data is used educationally for accountability. In my own opinion, it's used too much for accountability, but because there's so much more that you do that as a teacher that is valuable that can't be measured quantitatively. And pretty much CCRPI is almost all quantitative. There is some perception data you could say is qualitative that's in CCRPI, but most of CCRPI is quantitative. Why? Because it's easier to collect. Helps us evaluate that success of an initiative. I kind of use that with tracking progress. It helps us create an urgency of change, for change. So when you see the data is glaring at you that something needs to happen, that's the first step of Kotter's 8 steps, is that it helps create that urgency for change. And data helps us tell a story. You're going to hear me talk a lot, until you're probably not going to want to hear it anymore, about how I want you to tell a story. I want you to use the data to tell a story. Data by itself is just a collection of numbers and graphs, but when you use it to tell a story, that's when it's powerful. All right, when you read the article on Kotter, the article that you read was on barriers to successful change. It was these same steps, these same 8 steps that Kotter says are necessary, and they do happen somewhat sequentially, but also can happen somewhat cyclically to create a successful change initiative. And if you jump over any of those steps, then your change initiative could fail. And you see right at the bottom, establish a sense of urgency. For a change initiative to be successful, there has to be something that urges people to want to change. And so you can probably think about, in education, we are notorious for being bandwagon people. We jump on a bandwagon, things are, the pendulum swings back and forth. We try an initiative, we do an initiative, and it flops. Well, why does it flop? Well, maybe that urgency, that sense of urgency hadn't been created. By presenting the data before you present a change initiative, that could create that sense of urgency. Well, once you got this sense of urgency, there needs to be a guiding coalition, a group of people that come together that become the leaders initiating or pushing towards this change. So that guiding coalition's got to be there. You just can't jump from that sense of urgency all the way up to institutionalizing the change, because the change initiative will not work. So once you got this guiding coalition, this small group of people that can help push and help navigate an institution toward change, that group needs to develop a clear shared vision, something that they can all articulate is important towards that change initiative. What's this change initiative going to do for us? If we adopt this, this is what it's going to do for us. It helps you communicate the vision. They then need to communicate that vision. They've got to get it out to the larger group to say, all right, here's what we're proposing. Here's why we're proposing it. Here's our shared vision. And then they communicate that vision out to the larger group. Then the next step is to empower people to act on that vision. It's not enough to just tell them about what the change initiative is coming. You then have to empower people to get to the tipping point. And that was a Malcolm Gladwell idea of, once you get to a tipping point beyond a certain amount, you begin to feel where there's momentum picked up behind this change initiative. That's how you empower people to act on that vision. Once those people feel empowered to act, more and more people will begin to act on that vision till you get to that tipping point that will help you institutionalize that change. Next, you create short-term wins. Have you ever been in a situation where you could see the long-term goal, but you didn't really celebrate any short-term wins? And so if you don't celebrate those short-term wins, what happens is people get tired of the initiative because they're all trying to go to this long-term goal. You need to celebrate and have a party and pass out ice cream and do anything for short-term wins. In my own school, one thing that I'm very big about is celebrating along the way when we show progress. Not necessarily our end goal being that we want our graduation rate to be X percentage, but if we've increased by 2%, that's a short-term win. Let's celebrate it. That helps institutionalize that change. And then consolidate and build on the gains. So once that momentum has started, pull all of those successful things that you're doing, and then that would allow you to institutionalize the change. So I'm going to stop here for a second, and I want you to think, how does data analysis and how does using data help mitigate some of those issues or help facilitate this type of change? Can you give me one of these levels where you could see data fitting in to really helping one of those levels? Somebody talk to me.
I think if I look at the part where you say empower people to act on the vision, when I think about school, I feel like when you give people the vision, if you have the data to support it, then I think people will get on board. I think that a lot of times in schools we say great things that we want to do, but people don't understand why we're doing it. But if we had some data to support why we're doing it, then people would be empowered for the vision.
Okay, that's a great point. And one thing I heard that I heard in what you were saying is that if you kept going back to the data and looking at the data along the way, that helps empower that vision, because you can see we may not be at the end goal yet, but we're making this incremental progress. And so that helps empower people to want to act more because they see the incremental progress. Good point. Give me another one, somebody else.
One of the articles mentioned that sometimes there's just data, and then like no action plan after. And I found like in a number of schools I've worked at, that's like, we don't really know what to do with it. So that just sort of puts a caveat in that acting on the vision, because sometimes we don't really know where to go. I forget which article it was. But.
Okay, so how does data help create that action plan then?
No, I'm saying sometimes just like to a caveat to what was just said is that sometimes it like let's say like benchmark or data, you know, they're like kids can't make inferences or whatever. I'm coming from an ELA standpoint, and sometimes we have just like multiple data points that confirm that, but we don't know where to go from there. We know there's a sense of urgency. We know that we want our kids to be able to read well and make inferences, but sometimes we don't know how to go about improving. Like, I just feel like sometimes, like I've been in a number of schools where it's just like data, but then no clear action plan to improve upon particular data points, if that makes sense.
Okay, no, I get what you're saying.
Like disempowering in a way.
All right, thank you. Somebody else can give me another level in how data could help support that that step in a change initiative.
Well, I think the first step, that's probably my favorite, actually, the urgency and getting rid of complacency.
Okay.
If we can show teachers and students that, you know, you're not at 100%, whatever it is, and it's going to be hard to get to 100%, but just so teachers and students don't get so comfortable with being at a 70% rate, a passing rate, or even 80 or 90%, if we can always, you know, not sit back so much, but constantly be trying and trying to develop a new vision and different ideas to go about obtaining whatever goal we set for ourselves.
Okay, very good point. So that it helps us mitigate complacency, so that people aren't just kind of sitting back on their laurels, and because everybody can continue to improve. You know, it's interesting. You know, back to our AYP discussion. You know, AYP said that by, was it 2013, I believe, that 100% of students would be reading on grade level, would be mastering mathematical contents on grade level. 100%. There is not a country in the world that has 100% mastery. Even Finland, that's, you know, always out there as the of you know, that we're all supposed to emulate, doesn't have 100% mastery. And so it was really a unreachable goal for us. But to Stevie's point, knowing where we are does help us not sit back on our laurels and continue to improve, and not rest when we're not get to an area where we go, well, that's just good enough, because we can continue to improve. We may not ever get to that 100% mark, but we always can continue to improve, so that urgency just keeps moving us forward to keep working. You know, that's what teachers do. That's what teachers do so well, is that, you know, you look at something and you're always thinking, okay, next year when I teach this again, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to do it a different way, so that you can improve upon it, so that your students will improve upon whatever. Okay. Anybody else see something there that kind of jumped out at them in Kotter's 8 steps as something that data could help facilitate that step?
Well, it justifies the short-term wins.
Okay. It kind of gives you that metric so you can justify those short-term wins. I agree. So it gives you the reason to party. Very good. Good point. Anybody else? All right, we'll be talking about Cotter a lot more over the course of the 8 weeks, so don't forget him. He's a good guy. It's probably one of the easiest change initiative or change models to understand, and it really is true. All right, so you also read a article from Victoria Bernhardt on multiple measures, and Victoria Bernhardt is one of the premier data experts in the world. She actually works a lot in Georgia. If you have had any association with the University of West Georgia, Mary Hooper has written a book with Victoria Bernhardt, so she has connections here in Georgia. But she talks about 4 different types of data, and I know you read the article on multiple measures, and this is going to kind of provide our foundation for how you will build your data presentation. Is I will want to see different types of data, not just learning data, because it takes all 4 types of this data for us to get a comprehensive view of what your school looks like and what's going on in your school. And of course, those 4 areas are demographics, student learning, school processes, and perception. And you can see with her Venn diagram here on the screen that it's when these processes interact or intersect that you can really have powerful data for a change initiative. We're going to talk next in 2 weeks about how these things intersect. You'll actually read an article or visit a website, I believe, actually, on intersecting these different types of data from Victoria Bernhardt. But it's when you get to this sweet spot right here in the middle of her Venn diagram is when data analysis becomes the most powerful. Unfortunately, we look at student learning data, and that's all we look at for school accountability. Even though some demographic data may be there, there is a little bit of perception data. There's no school process data in CCRPI. But Victoria Bernhardt says it takes all 4 to truly be able to describe a school and figure out what would be most impactful in improving that school. Okay, so we're going to talk more about that. I want to make sure you understand each of these 4. So demographic data provides descriptive information about the school community, such as enrollment, attendance, grade level, ethnicity, gender, native language. You talked all about that. So it's like, what does your school look like? That's your demographic data, okay? Now, there will be some crossover data that could fit in more than one category. So it's not all mutually exclusive, so don't be confused by that. But, talking about what's the ethnic makeup of your school community, what's your attendance rate, how many students have been tardy more than X number of days, what grade levels are in your school, what's the native language. All of those things fall under demographic data, okay? And it's important for us to understand the context that you are existing in. You can't take 2 schools that have 2 very different demographics and compare them to apples, because it's not an apples to apples comparison. Somebody earlier mentioned the effect of poverty on schools. Now, that's not to make an excuse, don't get me wrong, but poverty does impact a student's ability to achieve. And there's so many things on the outside environmentally that affect that child's ability to achieve, that you're really not getting a true picture of the school if you don't address that school's demographic data, okay? So 2 schools that don't look the same demographically really shouldn't be compared, even though we know they are. They really shouldn't. So Bernhardt says that demographic data is important to build context, and that's kind of what I was talking about. Once you look at the achievement data, but you understand the demographic data that happens underneath that achievement, then it builds that context. So if school A is not achieving as high as school B, there may be a demographic reason why. And so that's not to say that kids who are impoverished can't learn. They certainly can. They can learn at high levels. But there are things that students from poverty bring into the educational environment that we don't need to ignore. We don't need to think that a student that's privileged socioeconomically and a student who is disadvantaged socioeconomically, they're not going to approach education the same way. And we need to know that. Demographic data can show change. It is a base for disaggregation, as we talked about earlier, and it can allow us to predict how certain groups, demographic groups, will perform in certain environment because of we'll be able to look back at how similar demographics have performed in the past. Perception data is probably some of the most powerful data that can be collected, but again, there's not a lot of it in CCRPI. It helps us understand what students, parents, teachers, and others think about the learning environment. So think is what's important in perception data. So it is the Georgia Student Health Survey that your students complete, that's part of your school climate rating. The Georgia Personnel Survey, that is perception data your teachers complete. And the Georgia Parent Survey is perception data, where very often it's collected on a Likert scale of I strongly agree, I'm neutral, I disagree, or I strongly disagree. It gives us an idea of what they perceive about the job we're doing. There is some data out there like greatschools.org, niche, that are online kind of things that do collect perception data. Now there's a lot of disagreement as to whether that perception data is valid and reliable, but it is out there. And so what people think is important. It's not always true. Perception data is not always true. Sometimes you have to challenge the perception data, but the perception is what people think. And you've all heard the adage, perception is reality. Well, you sometimes have to challenge that reality if it's not the same. But knowing what people think about your school and about your processes is important. So perception data allows us to understand the motivation behind why people act a certain way. It helps us know satisfaction. Are your parents satisfied with your school? Are your clients satisfied with what's going on in the school? How do your kids feel about your students feel about what's going on? If you've been teaching a while, we used to have surveys of instructional practice with as part of TEKS, and that was perception survey that students did about their teachers. And you'll fill out an evaluation of me at the end of this course. That's perception data that we're collecting about your perception of what went on in the course. Student learning data. This is the data that we most readily collect and we use as the basis for everything, but it really is only one component of those of the four that we should be collecting. But it describes the results of our system in terms of standardized test results, grade point averages, standards assessments, and authentic assessments. So anything that is numbers-based and has to do with student learning, that is our student learning data. It does allow us to evaluate programs, to measure student proficiency, to diagnose learning problems that are out there or issues that we've got learning wise, to make sure students don't fall through the cracks. That's where our discussion about EYP kind of comes in. And that disaggregate data and looking at the disaggregated data, student learning data of those different subgroups. It allows us to assess individual or group achievement. We use learning data for a certificate or for graduation to make sure students have mastered the content and earned 23 credits to graduate here in Georgia. To revise curriculum, we certainly do that based on student achievement data to improve our instruction. It is used for accountability. We've talked about that already. To understand which programs are getting the results that we want, to understand their efficacy, if they're getting what we want them to do, and to know if we're achieving our educational outcomes. So we're not just relying on our anecdotes or anecdotal data, but relying more on something that's more empirical and more tangible. And finally, school process data, which in my opinion is probably the one that is collected the least, but it's very important. It defines what teachers and schools are doing to get the results that we are getting. So, for example, if you are using a certain program in your school, if you are teaching using Odysseyware, for example, for credit recovery, that is a piece of school process data. If you are using a certain software program to teach reading comprehension or to teach vocabulary acquisition, those types of things are bits of data. And we're not collecting them via survey or via test, but those are school process data. If you're on a 7-period day, if you are teaching on block, that is school process data. And that data comes into play. So when we're looking at student achievement, it would be interesting. Let's look at student achievement from students who were on a 7-period day versus student achievement of those students who were on block. When you take those two and collect them together, then you can begin to see the catalyst for school improvement, okay? Or something that would give us an idea of something that maybe we should improve upon. So the 7-period day is school process, whereas achievement is learning data. But it's when the two are intersected, as we talked about before, that you can begin to see something that could improve schools. So school process data could be anything about the number of AP classes that you offer at your school. Now, I usually talk from a high school perspective because that's what I know most, even though I have worked at all 3 levels. It could be that the number of connections classes that you have. It could be the types of things that your parent liaison does if you're a Title I school. Those types of things are school process data. And so being able to collect some of those things helps us to define and helps us describe, make a comprehensive view of the school. So they help us diagnose those learning problems. They tell us how we get the results that we get, what we're doing to get those results, and they inform us of what we need to do differently. So as my example of the 7-period day and the block schedule and which do students achieve best on, that would inform us of what we need to do differently. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there and allow you to ask any questions, or if anybody's got anything you want to talk about or anything you want to interject about the 4 different types of data, because they're all very, very important. So anybody want to?
Would perception be say how the parents view education in general? I guess what I'm saying is like parents who don't value education or don't want to be bothered by assisting their children with education. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I'm in one of those schools where they just want we have a lot of parents because of the nature of what our demographics are, that a lot of our parents, I would say probably 50%, see it as babysitting and not education. And so would that be perception in the fact that they don't see a value in it?
To answer your question, Candy, well, yes, in a general sense, it would be perception data. How you would collect that data, I'm not really sure, because I don't believe any parent out there would fill out on a survey that I don't value education. I don't think they would ever say that on a survey. But we could ask your perception of how you think the students or how you think the parents in your school view school. That would be your perception data. Mm-hmm. Now, what is it that controls parents to be that way? That might fall under demographic data. There may be some demographic reasons why they think
so
that.
You could take that from the county data of the percentage of Section 8 housing and the percentage of SNAP benefits, the percentage of welfare funding, the fact that the county is one of the highest in the state as far as the percentage of federal funding as far as benefits overall, and as a motivator of why the motivation is so low.
Well, I don't know that you could jump to a causal relationship but between those pieces of demographic data that you were talking about and jump to parent perception of the importance of education. I don't think you could jump to a causal relationship there. You certainly could take that demographic data, though, Candy, and explain the environment that your students live in, mm-hmm. and the type of home environment that your students have. And I think your listener could make that connection. Right. But I don't know that there would be any way that you could really truly make that causal connection between the two. But as you described, those different pieces of data points that you described, you're describing a very low income type environment, and we do know that there are certain things that come along with poverty, and those
right.
things of poverty do affect how a student interacts at school.
Right.
So yeah, but your point, earlier I said that sometimes these data points they overlap. Mm-hmm. Your point there is that they overlap. Even though it was perception data that you were talking about, how did you describe that perception data? You used demographic data to support what your perception is of the parents in your building.
Yeah. Well, it mostly comes from parents telling you directly, but
Okay.
but
Well, so,
yeah, I mean, you would have to use the data. You would have to use data to be able to support it.
you know what would be interesting, Candy, is to collect data from all the faculty members in your building
Hmm.
about their perceptions of how parents have interacted with them. And then you would have real perception data to use to describe your school.
Well, that's kind of what drove it, is that we have done that as teachers,
Uh-huh.
and it does not match what our administrators would like to believe. We have what the teachers have collected or together as a school, and compared it to what the administrators would like to believe, compared to what our social worker has had to experience. And the social workers' data kind of goes with what the teachers are saying, and we understand why administrators, kind of not want to go down that route, but we kind of would like it to be a little bit more honest and open, so that there's a solution that comes into play, to help teachers be able to navigate it instead of have to battle it all the time.
That's a complex, very complex situation that you're describing. But I get what you're saying. I think it would be very interesting to have a conversation about if you have 3 different data points and those 3 different data points don't agree, to have a conversation about the context why those 3 different data points that you mentioned, the social work data point, the administrative data point, the teacher data point, why don't they agree? We had, I collected, when I started at Fayette County High 5 years ago, one of the things that I did, collecting some perception data, is that I had parents and teachers and students write 5 adjectives about that describe the school, because I wanted to, as a new administrator, I wanted to understand the perception of the school. And so I took those 5 adjectives and collected them, via a Google form, collected from parents 5 adjectives, from students 5 adjectives, and from teachers 5 adjectives, and I created a Wordle. It was, and if you've used Wordles before, Wordles are a great graphic representation. That the more often the word is used, the larger it is in the Wordle. So I thought it was cool that you could see that I could say that we collected the student data in class. They did it in class when they were doing their when they used to have to do the perception surveys of the teacher. We had them respond with their 5 adjectives, had sent it out to parents, had them respond, and I had teachers respond with their 5 adjectives. What was most interesting about what I did, Candy, is that what parents say about us, what teachers say about us, and what students say about us didn't match. And so some of the most interesting conversations we had as a school were, why don't they match? Our teachers rated us much more highly than our students and our parents did. And that was, I guess, because maybe they thought everything they were doing was great. They were using adjectives like energetic and engaged and things like that. And where students were using words like boring and sit and get and things like that. So it really created some very interesting conversation. So it was perception data that was collected, and then we were able to then craft some school improvement goals based on this conversation that we had. So
sounds like an interesting project.
It was very interesting.
What about like school process data though in that conversation? What are teachers and schools doing to make kids feel connected to school? Like, I mean, maybe what we're doing in schools is not relevant to the reality that kids are living. And therefore they don't perceive it as useful, which I wouldn't either. If my world was not reflected in what I was doing every day. So, I mean, isn't that a school process question?
You're absolutely right. And that's what kind of happened there, Beth, when we had the conversations, is that we kind of came to the consensus that we needed more options for kids to be able to take more CTAE classes or more electives classes, that they needed something that they fully engaged with at school. And that then spilled over into academics as well, because once the students became more engaged in school, they did better academically as well. And so we transitioned from a 6-period day to a 7-period day, became one of the things to give students more options. We increased the number of AP offerings we had. We increased the number of CTAE pathways that we offer. And that all kind of started with those conversations about why we thought we were just doing fine, but parents didn't necessarily think that, and students didn't necessarily think that. And so we had to come up to, why not? And then what can we do about it? So that's the crux of what this course is all about. It's kind of figuring out some of those connections to improve your school.
Yeah, I've found data driving everything now. If you can get the kids and build that relationship and that passion for learning and connect it to one thing in their life, they'll keep coming back for more and more and more and more and more. And I think that's something that we all need to focus on a lot more, is making it relevant to their daily life and not our own daily life as teachers.
Right. Very good. Good point. Anybody else want to interject before we move on? All right. Good discussion. Thank you so much. All right. So here's what's going to happen. In just a second, I'm going to put you in a breakout room. And I'm going to send via chat link 4 Google Docs. And what I would like you to do is, if you still have it open, go to that Today's Meet, and I'm going to ask you in your breakout room to characterize some of those data points that we did on the Today's Meet. I want you to categorize them as either perception data, school process data, demographic data, or student learning data. Now, your group will only be assigned one of those. And so depending on what group you get thrown into, because I'll just let Zoom randomly assign you, I'm going to send you via the chat the link to the Google Doc, and it'll tell you room 1 will do, I'll show you right now. Room 1 will do perception data. So I want you to look through that list that we brainstormed and then anybody can type, it's open to everybody. Type on the Google Doc different types of perception data. Room 2 will do student learning data, and room 3 will do demographic data, and then room 4 will do school process data. All right, let me copy and paste this into the chat right now, and so you can use the link once you get into your room. You don't know what room you're in yet. Let's stop sharing my screen. I think the clicking that you hear might be my chair. I may come up with a different chair better for next time. All right. So whoops, I just sent that to one person. Sorry. Let me send it to everybody. All right. When you get into your room, this is the Google Doc that matches your room. I'd like you to pull up, and then if you'll look at, it'll be you and one other person, because there's 8 of you here today. And we'll be in 4 different rooms, so 2 of you together can communicate, and then I'll pull us all back together. We'll take about maybe 7 minutes for this activity. Okay, I'm going to move you into breakout rooms, and I'll come in and check on you in just a second. All right, Tori, I need you to accept in breakout room 2. There you go.
Hey, sir.
Hey, do you have a problem?
Just when we go into our individual rooms, we don't have access to the links. And I didn't click on the link ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to do something right. Nope, it's not even on here. Maybe. Give me one second.
Can you see chat? Can you see
I'm on the
chat,
but it doesn't pull it up now that I left and came back to this room.
Okay, let me see if I can. So when you're in the room by itself, you can't see my chat at all? I tell you what.
So now look at our chat. I think you're going to have to copy and paste one more time because I think it clears everyone's chat out.
Okay, let me try this. I tell you what, we'll do this. I'm just gonna let you open. I'm gonna get you back into the main room. We'll get everybody back in the main room and try again.
I don't see anything in the chat anymore.
That's funny. It's not even letting me chat either.
No, I went to the main session. Oh,
Okay, that was major fail number one. Apologize about that. I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna share the 4 rooms again. So can you see the 4 rooms, the links to the 4 rooms now? Go ahead, if you will, and because you don't know, so I can put you back in the. I'm gonna put you back in the same room. If you remember the room that you were in, you can now go ahead and open Betsy and Kevin in breakout room 1, Stevie and Tori in room 2, Beth and Miss Proctor, and I don't want to mispronounce her name again, in room 3, and Jessica and Candy in room 4. So go ahead and open your Google Doc, and then I'll move you back into your rooms. Again, that's Betsy and Kevin in room 1, Stevie and Tori in room 2, Beth and Sheree. I'm trying. In room 3, and Jessica and Candy. Thank you for the thumbs up, Trey. I appreciate it. I even wrote it phonetically on my book over here. All right, so everybody got your, give me a thumbs up if you got your Google Doc open. Okay. Anybody have trouble getting the Google Doc open? All right, I'm sending you to your room so you can converse with your partner. All right, Candy, you just need to accept in the breakout room.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
portable. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
like
exactly.
we didn't really discuss our information. Really didn't. We didn't give that much in that brainstorming thing.
Exactly.
How's it going in here?
Good. We realized that like for ours, we have like the process data.
Uh-huh.
We didn't really state that much of that in the brain discussion.
You're right.
Like we stated more factual number data and not like data that you would draw in. Like this was more kind of outlier data, I guess, or foundational data. Like I was saying to Candy, like we didn't think on the outside of like, okay, how many kids are passing classes that are in a classroom versus those that are in a portable.
Sure.
So we didn't pull in that data. We really stuck to like very stereotypical data forms when we went through that.
You kind of proved my point that school process data is probably the most overlooked data that's
But it's
out
the most
there.
important. I mean,
So that-
if you look at it, most of the portables are our health and fitness right now at our school and our modified classes. So the majority of your modified students are not passing very many of their other classes. So you could really run across of that data and show that location in classrooms, the lower kids are not favored, and the higher kids are favored, and do something like that. And that can also have something to do with our view of the students. We use the data to drive where they are in terms of their physical being.
Right. Good points. Very good points. Well, you got a good list going there. I see. So keep that up. And when we go back into the main room, discuss that because that's a good point. I want you to discuss how we kind of didn't mention too much school process data. And feel free to add more to this list than what we even talked about in the brainstorming session.
All right.
All right. I am going to move myself back out and
I added the lesson plans on there.
good. All right, I will pull you back in just a few minutes. How's it going in here, ladies?
I think we're doing pretty good. Homelessness. Yeah, I think
Let's see, which one is yours?
demographics.
Demographic. Okay, that's what I'm on right now. Yeah, you've got a good list. In fact, a lot of what we talked about in the brainstorming session was demographic data. So you were set up well, weren't you?
Yes.
Did you come up with any different ones other than what we had talked about in the brainstorming session?
I just thought of one and then I forgot it. We never did like gender breakdown in school because I'm reading the article. I'm looking at the article and it says gender. Did we ever say like how many boys to girls?
I don't think we did. So you can certainly add that. It's always 50-50.
But no, I think too, now with everything happening too, I mean, when we want to look at, because I know in my school, we have students who are like transitioning. So would that be something that you want to consider as well?
Interesting. That's definitely a sign of the times.
Yeah. Do you know what's demographic info that I don't think I can get like officially because I don't want to get anyone in trouble is like my students who are documented and who are not documented.
I don't know that I would have that information on the students in my school, and I'm the principal. I'm sure I have some kids that are. The McKinley-Vento Act says that anybody who is homeless, you have to take into school, and a lot of the kids that we have that are under McKinley-Vento are undocumented. So that'd be interesting data, but I'm with you. I don't think it would be available. Okay, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to pull you back in about 3 minutes into the main room. Okay, looks like y'all are doing well.
Are the teachers doing this in order to accommodate, in order to accommodate that? So that's kind of how I'm seeing it, I guess, inside of the schools where we are now.
How's it going in here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's going good.
Which group are y'all?
We're group 2.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We're the student learning data.
Okay. Yeah, y'all got a nice long list there.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Tori was doing a really good job of picking those out.
Well, you're typing fast. I think I'm talking fast, and you're typing fast.
That's right.
See, now, some of your student learning data here could fall under other categories, like do they like or feel ready for college?
Yeah.
That to me sounds very perception based. What do you think? That may be more perception data than student learning data? Because when I think student learning data, I think more of test data. So ACT scores, SAT scores, that kind of stuff is really the student learning data. But as we said, there is definitely crossover, no problem. So you got a nice long list there. All right, I'm gonna pull you back into the main room in about 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Who is in charge of nutrition for the county is the one that's really spearheading it. And so ideally, the goal is to have our ag department at our school able to provide for our cafeteria. So right now it's working, but on a very small scale.
Okay.
But that's sort of where they're trying to go towards.
I'd like to see how that ends up working out.
We're not there yet, but that's
going
what
in the right direction.
my brain was kind of thinking when I put that is like.
And I did. I said where food comes from, and I put an arrow farm to table initiative where a little more explanation if they're asking on it.
So how's it going in here?
I was going to say, did you come to put an end to our conversation?
Well, we're going to pull back in just a second. I was just taking a look at what you put there. Any questions or anything about?
I think like Betsy and I said, some of the biggest things is clarification on what they meant when we listed it, because there can be different in that statement right there, different perceptions on what they meant by it when we wrote it in, such as attendance, how many too many absences and such, or cleanliness. How do you define it? So there's some pieces to it.
Okay.
But I think we're doing pretty good.
All right, great. Well, I'm gonna pull you back in about 1 minute, and then if one of you will just kind of give us the overview of what your discussion was.
Okay.
All right, I'll pull you back in about 30 seconds probably.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
We got a whole lot left.
All righty. Okay, so the group who had perception data, talk to us a little bit about what your discussion was in deciding which of our points were perception data. Because it's interesting, you're going to find out that some of you put the same thing on multiple lists. You'll see the same type of data on multiple lists, and that's okay. So somebody who had perception data, talk to us a little bit.
Well, Betsy and I were talking perception data, because of some of the ways that we listed it, is very limited in our description of it. So therefore, it came over into multiple aspects. One of the big ones that we brought up was budget. Budget can be very quantitatively rich, but at the same time, there's a perception of what we're spending our money on, and is it return on investment, as my master's in educational leadership put on it. Is it worth it? Is what we're spending our dollars when we come end of the day, is it working? Lack of nutrition. It was a conversation where we didn't even make it through some of our lists because of some of the discussion that Betsy and I had together about the different perceptions. Perception in itself a lot of it leads for us to have decisions on where we would put it in the placement of the 4 categories.
Good point. And because we did some things that were very large, like you mentioned budget, I think that's a very good point, that really you could take the budget and you could, budget could be described in quantitative ways, but there's qualitative stuff underneath it
Yes.
too. So depending on how you dissect the budget could determine exactly what type of data that is. So, so good point. Anything jump out at anybody here that you think maybe isn't perception data? Let's see. And I see what you put, like retention. The reason that teachers are leaving would be perception data. The amount of teachers who leave would be more school process data. Where the food comes from, farm to table, could be perception data. It could also be process data. If you've got a farm to table initiative, that could be a process of your school. So, so very good. All right, well done.
I thought it was interesting they put behavior, because at my school, like when you talk about perception, one of the things is that it's the perception of what people think the kids at the school act like based off the history to how the school is now. So a lot of people hear like, oh my gosh, King High School is, it's a bad school. They fight every day. A lot of people just think negative things. We used to be on the news all the time. And now that was the perception of the school. But when you go to the school, it's like, no, that's not the truth.
Yeah, you're right. So behavior, if you were just looking at the number of office discipline referrals, that could be just school process data. But how your school is perceived behavior-wise would be perception data. If you're a PBIS school, PBIS does a great job of collecting perception data of how people in your building perceive what's going on. And then looking at sometimes you can use the school process data or demographic data to challenge the perception data, which is kind of interesting because we have some of the same kinds of perception things in my own school, and but I can use the real data to challenge what the perception is. So good point. All right, moving on. Who had student learning data? Let's have somebody talk about student learning. About to take a break. Everybody talk at one time.
Sorry.
Okay.
Me and Tori had student learning data, and we went through the list, and as we went through the list, we kind of felt like I'm sure most of y'all did, where a lot of this list could fall under like a large umbrella of all 4 of the I don't know numbers that Dr. Lane gave us. But as Dr. Lane said, a lot of this stuff is quantitative, and we need the data and the scores to back up some of this stuff and how it affects the student learning. So I don't know, as we went through the size, as we went through the list, we tried to kind of figure out some things that we could get numbers and not so much perception and how people feel about different things in the school.
Okay. So now when you're talking about feeling, remember that's more perception data.
So that's what I was. When you came in, that's what you were saying, that we didn't need to have the feeling and the perception inside of our student learning data list.
Right. Yeah. Typically, when you're looking at student learning, that's basically test scores.
Yes.
But I understand you kind of took it into a larger context than just test scores, and why the test scores may be the same. So you started intersecting different types of data points together, which you're just the bright ones. Go ahead, Tori.
I think we were looking at the categories, or how I perceived it, right? Was we were looking at different areas that could affect the student learning data at the end of the day, that could affect the learning.
Okay.
And that learning is the data. So, for example, going to college versus military, how that shows up in their data. I was sharing with Stevie was, I've actually had it in my classroom where I've had students who are enrolled in ROTC tell me we're not put in as much effort in my 9th grade literature class because, they're not going to college anyway. They're going to go to the military. And my sentiments are back to them always. Well, you still have to graduate. You still have to take an entrance exam, to get into the military. So it's still important. But with that being said, then it goes against how they perform in my class, how seriously they take the, state exams and those types of things. And so that's, I guess, how I was kind of interpreted us going down that, down that list of things.
Well, you're just the advanced ones because you're actually just jumping ahead about 2 weeks. And so basically what you're doing, what you and Stevie did, is you took the student learning data and you intersected it with perception data and process data, which is exactly kind of what we're going to be talking about next week. So you looked at the two together. So student learning data by in and of itself is just test scores.
Mm-hmm.
When you take it, but when it's most powerful, as you pointed out, is when you take it and you intersect it with the why, and that's when we began to see things that we should improve upon in our school. So good job. So in its most basic form, it's test scores.
Okay.
All right. School process data.
We had that. Me and Candy had that. What we kind of came across was that we didn't really discuss that very much because we went off of the list. So we realized it was kind of an overlooked piece of data. You don't really look at maybe how many English classes are taught, or where the English classes are taught, or certain things. So some of these you guys have already mentioned, they kind of cross data. But like I had made the example that these are kind of like basic data things that aren't really number related specifically to like testing or something. They're kind of just legitimate data issues, like the amount of portables you have on campus, as I gave the example, and what classes are in the portables, the amount of kids that are failing that are taking classes in the portables versus the classes that are taught in classroom buildings, and how many of those kids are passing. So you can actually see the intersection of the process data at this point. But I guess you could say this is like the lower rung of data, and you just overlook it for that CT testing scores, student behavior, or attendance, and this is kind of the overlooked.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jessica. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. This is not difficult data to collect. And so we sort of look like we usually go to those things that have some type of instrument that collects the data. And this could be just as easy as counting the number of Promethean boards you have in your school, or the number of modulars that you have as your example. So, but it is very important. And as you mentioned, it's when we started intersecting those two together that we began to see, there may be something here that we need to look at as a way to improve our school. Okay, very good point. And let's see, who's left? Demographic?
Yes.
Go ahead and talk about it, somebody.
So we had a large part, when we looked at the list, we felt like it was a lot from the demographics and what we put into the data brainstorming website. So we just kind of pulled from the list that we created as a class. So just looking at our demographics, looking at the class size, the budget, number of students eating lunch, mental health, vending machine sales. We talked about homelessness, background, racial background, languages spoken. So we had a lot from our list that we talked about as a class for the demographic data.
Talk about your when I came into your group about the kids that are transitioning. That was interesting discussion.
Yeah, because we had not mentioned in that little thing, whatever it's called, meetup or whatever, I don't know.
Today's meet.
About gender, which was interesting. And then Chulray, am I saying it right?
Chulray. It's okay.
Chulray mentioned, like transitioning. It's sort of possibly could be connected to mental health, so maybe there are more visits to guidance counselors and things like that. And then do we need more services? We also talked about like something that maybe you can't even capture. I work obviously with, as I've mentioned, ESOL, like documented versus undocumented students. You can't really capture that, or can you? I mean, they tell me, but I'm not sure I want to report that and get anyone, it just, so anyway, those were sort of the gray areas we talked about.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of thought about the McKinley-Vento Act says that you have to take any student into your school that's considered quote unquote homeless. And very often those students that are homeless are undocumented. So even for my school, I wouldn't have that kind of data of who in my school is undocumented. But it would be interesting just to see that data. All right. Well, good job, guys. You really got to the essence of each of those 4 data types, and you began to see how once we start intersecting those data types, that it really becomes the essence of school improvement. So we're about to take a break. So let me get here real quick. We'll take a quick break, and before I come back, and I'll do a presentation for you. Let's see. Talked about all the different places that you can find data. I'm not going to pull these up for essence of time for you today, but of course CCRPI is easily accessible. Just do a Google search for CCRPI 2017 and you will have that information. Your student information system, if you use Infinite Campus or PowerSchool, etc., or SASE, those are repositories of data, and so you will most likely have a student information clerk at your school that could give you data. Those student information systems all run data reports for you. They can do that for you. The State Longitudinal Data System, the SLDS, that's accessed through your student information system, is a repository of data. What you see as a teacher is different than what your assistant principal or principal could see. And so you may want to get with them to be able to pull some stuff through from the SLDS for you. There's a lot of data visualization software that's out there today. Because there's so much data, because of DRIP, data rich information poor, there's a lot of data visualization software that some systems are purchasing now that give you a data dashboard that allows you to see data in a more visual form. And then there's all sorts of other repositories such as SRI, Scholastic Reading Inventory. Edgenuity has its own repository of data. ThinkCirca, there's just tons that are out there. So you'll want to go on that data search. We'll talk about it in a little bit to really make sure that that you know what data is truly available for you. So we're going to take a quick break. In fact, let's do maybe 3 minutes. Go to the restroom if you need to grab a drink of water or something. I've got 7:48 at 7:51. You're going to hear a story about a local high school. Okay, let's take a quick break. All right, let's go ahead and get started back. I've got everybody on, getting like most people are getting settled back in. I'm going to show you an example of a data presentation that I actually did. That was of my school. I'll show you the data of Fayette County High School. The entire presentation is 45 to 55 minutes. I won't be giving you the entire presentation, so you can relax. But I don't want you to think that this is what you have to do for your presentation either. So yours is for the stakeholder group is approximately 30 minutes, and the one for class will be no more than 10. And so I don't want you to be overwhelmed by seeing what I had to do for this comprehensive data presentation. This one was done for our executive cabinet, which was our superintendent, assistant superintendents, and curriculum coordinators. They had each high school or each school do a data presentation for the school or for them to understand how the school has been progressing over the past few years. But the reason I want to show you this is so that you can kind of see what the end goal is. You know, Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. So yeah, don't want to bore you with my school's data, but I think it'll be interesting. I think you'll see how a compelling story can be told by using school data. So I want you to listen for while you're going through this presentation, and I will go ahead and give you the caveat that I have not updated this with my most recent data, but there is historical data here. But I want you to listen for the various data types that were mentioned by Victoria Bernhardt, the ones that we've been talking about. The various display types, I want you to look for, did I use line graphs in certain places and bar graphs and different ways that I displayed data? Did you hear all 4 types of data? And did you hear a coherent story about the school? And even though I told you it's my school and that I created the data presentation, I want you to be analytical about it. So we'll talk about it after I complete the data presentation about what you saw, and I want to see what your reaction was. So hang in there and let me tell you a little story about Fayette County High School. When I came to Fayette County High School 5 years ago, I really felt like the school was kind of floundering. It didn't really have a sense of who it was, and it didn't have a sense of identity. There were lots of great things going on at the school, but I called those random acts of goodness. The school didn't seem to have a clear vision, which reminded me of the line from Alice in Wonderland where Alice says, I just was wondering if you could help me find my way. And the Cheshire Cat says, well, that depends on where you want to go. And Alice says, oh, it really doesn't matter. And then the Cheshire Cat says, well, then it really doesn't matter which way you go. If you don't have this sense of direction, then you're certainly not going to get there. And so it has been my mantra at Fayette County High School to have sustainable, slow and steady progress. Stephen Covey says, where you're headed is more important on how fast you get there. And so that has kind of become something that's resonated with me. Success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out that we as a school aren't going to improve. It would be great to have this miraculous overnight improvement, but the small efforts are what are really going to be lasting. And that Jim Watkins, who was a TV personality, a river cuts through a rock, not because of its power, but because of its persistence. And so that's kind of become what we live by at Fayette County High School. So here's some things about who we are as a school at Fayette County High. Well, here's our total enrollment, and I gave you some historical data here all the way back to 2009. That a little bit before that, another school opened in Fayette County. And so our attendance declined rapidly. But Fayette County, based on the economic slump, because it's an expensive place to live, we lost students consistently for 4 years, but we've kind of been on a steady, somewhat steady incline of enrollment since then. And this year, in 2017, 2018, we actually have over 1,300 students. So just a little bit of incline. This is our demographic, our ethnic makeup, and you can see that African American is our largest ethnic group, followed by Caucasian. You can see that their demographic data, our historical data, has pretty much mirrored each other, whereas the other ethnicities have remained rather stagnant. This is our enrollment of economically disadvantaged students, and you can see that that has gone up tremendously over the course of the last few years as our county is in a demographic transition. That percentage of economically disadvantaged has gone up with it. This is our percentage of students in special populations. You'll see our gifted population is at the top. This is percentage of students in gifted, followed by special education in the middle, and ESOL. We have a very small ESOL population at my school because in Fayette County we have ESOL feeder schools, or schools where they're grouped together. This is our Tier 2, Tier 3, and Section 504 students. It looks like, if you just looked at the numbers, it looks like, oh my gosh, what happened to those students between 2013, 2016? That's not because we actually have more students that are RTI, Tier 2, and Tier 3, but we are doing a better job of identifying those students. And so they have a label now, whereas they didn't used to have a label. But you can see we are on the incline, and our 504 students also on the incline. New enrollments and withdrawals, you can see that we have somewhat of a decline in new enrollments and a decline in withdrawals, but that does give us about a 10% transient rate. So at the end of the year, teachers are seeing about 10% different. Our physical plant, we have a 20-year-old facility, 40-year-old athletic facilities because they built a new school 20 years ago adjacent to the old school, but we kept our old athletic facilities. And we have an auditorium that we use in the old facilities that's 50 years old. And there's a picture of the current Fayette County High School. Student opportunities, we do have award-winning fine arts programs. We have 9 CTAE pathways with modern, well-equipped labs. And you can see the different types of pathways that we offer. We have the Army Junior ROTC program with nationally award-winning rifle and drill teams. Full competitive athletic offerings with adding lacrosse most recently in 2014, and a nationally ranked step team at Fayette County High School. 38 clubs and organizations. We have an Amigos program, which links some of our Spanish-speaking ESOL students to elementary students, and our Key Club goes to a neighboring elementary school for mentoring. I have 102 certified faculty, 38 classified, 22 lay coaches. When I did this presentation, I was in my 4th year as being a principal, and 48% of my faculty were hired by me. So you can see there was a bit of pretty good turnover since I've been principal. But only 6 of the new hires that I had made left in those 4 years. Highest degree earned by faculty, you see that we are a pretty well-degreed faculty. Mostly with master's and specialist degree, but pretty well degreed. 24 bachelors, 8 doctorates. Some of our accolades, we are on the Washington Post Most Challenging High School list, Best High Schools in America list, a greatschools.org rating of 8 out of 10. We were a High Five Sports Team of the Week, and we've received quite a few AP rewards from the governor's office in Georgia. Our accountability data, where have we been? You'll see that our overall CCRPI score dropped a pretty good bit. That's when we made the transition from the end of course test to Georgia Milestones. That was pretty typical in Georgia, but we've been on a trajectory of improvement since that big drop between 13 and 14. In fact, our last year's CCRPI score was 81.3, so pretty good change there. Our CCRPI category points, you can see what they are. I won't go through them, but that's for each of the CCRPI category points. Post-high school readiness has been on the incline as well, which we're excited about that. Graduation rate has continued to climb. The blue is our 4-year graduation rate, and the red is our 5-year graduation rate, which says that for those students who don't complete school in 4 years, most of them do complete within 5 years. So very, very low true dropout rate. What about our achievement gaps? You'll see that we have a GPA gap between our newly enrolled students, those students that didn't go to Fayette County schools for 9 years before coming to my school, and those that come in, those that have been in the system and those that haven't been in the system. So a pretty good achievement gap, a 4% difference there. I will go ahead and tell you this is not the best way to display this data. Achievement gaps between economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged. You'll see that this was their scores here, between 2015 and 2016. If you're looking at the difference in blue and red, that's the difference of achievement between economically disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged. And if you look at green and purple, that's between in 2016, so 2015 and 2016. But what's even more telling is this slide shows that our progress of our economically disadvantaged students, the percentage of students scoring proficient or distinguished has been on the incline since we've been on the milestone score, which is great. This is our progress of our non-economically disadvantaged students, also on the incline with the exception of 2 areas. So both groups have shown progress by and large. Same thing of our comparing white students and black students. You'll see that if you're looking at blue and red comparison, that's from 2015, and green and purple is 2016. But also looking at it in a different way, you'll see that our black students have shown progress or shown increases in every area except for 1, and as well as our white students in every area except for 1. So what's our plan to improve? And I'm going to zip through this pretty quick because this doesn't necessarily go with what we're doing, but we have a school improvement process that is a collaborative process that we had departmental data discussions, and then they brought brainstorming data priorities back to our leadership team, and then we came up with some very high impact priorities for our school and created a 3-year SIP. We've actually taken that school improvement plan now and extended it out to 2020. So it's been a 5-year school improvement process for us. We have 10 school improvement goals. The first is to increase our weighted percentage of students at the developing learner or above on the 9th grade literature and composition milestones EOC exam. You can see what our baseline was in 2015 and what our goals are for 16, 17, and 18. This is a 3% increase. Literature says that a 3% increase in student achievement is a sustainable increase. So you don't jump 10%. I mean, it could happen, but for a goal, 3% is a sustainable increase. The goal 1B is the American Literature exam. So all the first 8 goals are all of the EOCs. You'll see our scores on biology milestones, end of course exam, the physical science. We didn't teach physical science in Fayette County until 2016, and so that's the first time, and our scores were pretty low. I'm real pleased with our scores this year, as I've seen from what just came in, much higher than you see there. Algebra 1 milestones exam, those are our scores, our baseline score and our goals. Analytic geometry or geometry with a new curriculum that came in 2017. United States history. Economics. Goal 2 is to decrease the percentage of students retained each year. So our retention rate was 9.6. I wanted to decrease the number of students or the percentage of students that are detained. Decrease the point gap between the grade point averages of those continuing students and those newly enrolled students. I showed you we had that gap between those students. So that means we need to do something for those students that are coming in from other places. To reduce the number of office discipline referrals. To reduce the number of students with 5 or more office discipline referrals. We chose that because that's reported to the state. And to reduce the number of students referred to discipline tribunal, which are serious discipline offenses. Increase our school climate rating. That comes from that perception data that is collected from the State Department. Decrease the number of unexcused tardies to school. This is an area that was very, very bad for my school when I came in. You can see the number of unexcused tardies was ridiculous there. Decrease the number of students who receive discipline for at least 4 unexcused tardies to school, and decrease the discipline of students who had 10 or more unexcused tardies. Again, that's reported to the state. So those are our frequent flyers, those students that are unexcused tardy a lot. So how we meet our goals, we have high impact initiatives that every student in our school or every teacher in our school teaches PBIS. We are a PBIS school and started that 3 years ago, so we're in our 3rd year of implementation. We have a literacy initiative in our school where every teacher is a literacy teacher. And we have a focus of differentiated instruction. At this time when I did this presentation, PBIS was in its second full year of implementation. With our attributes are respectful, on time, attentive, and responsible. We do have a token economy, and we have areas of focus that were our highest discipline incidences were those unexcused tardies to school, cell phones, and missing detentions and ninth grade referrals became focuses of our PBIS team. Now, I'm really thankful to be the principal of a school whose, the biggest things are cell phones and tardies to school. You can see our top 10 incidences there. That came from our Swiss data, from our PBIS data. Top 10 incidences the following year was electronic communication device. We changed our processes and how we dealt with cell phones in the school, and so our referrals actually went up, but that was okay because we knew why it was happening. Unexcused tardies to school, we put in a program called HERO where students have to check in the front office whenever they're late to class, and it automatically assigns consequences to students that are late to class. And so we've created a new monster, and that's students running to class. We don't have students in the hall anymore because they know they're going to get immediate consequences. Teachers close their door on the fourth tone of the tardy bell, and that door is locked, and students can't get into class without a HERO pass from attendance. So they have to go to a HERO pass to attendance and get this pass. And HERO automatically assigns detention after they get to a certain level. And then it progressively assigns more consequences if they continue to amass more tardies to class. And so this data is tardies to school. But we use it for tardies to school as well. And you can see that it has gone down in implementation. So we are excited about that. It's continued to go down. This is unexcused tardies to class. You can see that when we first started with HERO, we had about 60 incidences in a day. That was about 10 students late because we're on a 7-period day. But now, by the end of the year, we were down to 11 to 17 students. And that's out of 1,300 students, out of 7 periods, only 17 students, or even 11 in April, were late to class on average in a day, which that's tremendous. So a lot more students in class. Comparison of electronic communication device and violation of administrative detention for those areas of focus. You see they've gone down tremendously, which is great. And our detention referrals have gone down. Office discipline referrals by month. March is always a bad month for discipline, and it's continued to be. I think teachers are getting tired of kids, and kids are getting tired of teachers. So we always have a spike in discipline. But you can see progressively each year our discipline referrals have gone down. Our absence data has also gone down. We do have a behavioral response to intervention program, which is in place now, which is helping us address the behavioral issues in our school. Literacy initiatives, and it's in its 3rd year. We did teach academic vocabulary. Every teacher in the school taught Tier 2 vocabulary to our students. The 2nd year, we focused on ACES writing strategy. Every teacher, when they did writing, had to use this ACES writing strategy and assess the student writing with ACES strategy, no matter what curriculum you are in. And our ELA scores skyrocketed the following year, which was great. This was a pre-test and post-test on our power words that we used in literacy. You can see the change in pre-test, post-test scores. By and large, our students showed lots of change there. We did a book study on differentiated instruction to help our students, or help our teachers meet students where they are. I'd like to move through that. So how are we addressing the needs of all students? Well, we're doing it with RTI. We have a very vigorous RTI program. This is school process data, y'all, just so you know. And we've also done some things where we have assigned mentors to students that had lots of failures. And this is how many, from the 9-week mark to the end of the semester, how many classes students reduced their failure rate by. So lots of students. We had one student that even reduced his failure by 6. He was failing 6 classes at the 9-week mark and didn't fail any by the end of the mark. It's great. For our academically advanced students, we have a comprehensive AP program. We have lots of offerings and a gifted program for our academically advanced students. You can see our advanced placement enrollment has gone up with a little decline for a year ago. Our overall pass rate has also, after a small dip, has been on the increase. I'll just zip through these. Those are our math classes. These are our pass scores for science AP classes, for English AP classes. social studies AP classes, and fine arts AP classes. So what we're most proud about, as you saw, most of those are on the positive decline. So did we meet our goals? You can see that here, the goal 1 was about our 9th grade literature and composition milestones, that we did surpass that goal, and that's why it's marked in green. We surpassed our goal in American literature as well. In fact, we surpassed our 3rd year goal in American literature. We did not meet our goal in biology. We did the following year, by the way, which was great. In fact, we exceeded the goal, and I think we'll exceed it again this year. Physical science, we didn't know at this point. We hadn't gotten those results. We did not meet our goal in Algebra 1 with the new test and new curriculum, but we understood why. Analytic geometry, we did meet our goal there. United States history, we met our goal. Economics, we met our goal. And we did meet our goal in decreasing our percentage of retained students, and in fact, we blew our 3rd year goal. We decreased the point average, the gap between our continuing students. I have an intervention specialist that teaches a class just for new students that come in to help build those skill deficits that they have. We did not reduce our number of office discipline referrals. We knew why. When we became a PBIS school, we changed some of our processes, which caused our discipline referrals to go up. That's okay. We did meet our 2017 goal, though, because once those processes were in place and done with fidelity, then our school to office discipline referrals did go down. Did not meet our goal of number of students with 5 or more, same reasons. Same thing about discipline tribunal. Our numbers actually went up. But we did increase our school climate rating from 3 stars to 4 stars. And this past year, we were actually a 5-star school, and the only high school in our county that was 5 stars, which is interesting because we're the student that has the school with the lowest socioeconomic. But we were very excited about that. Decrease the number of unexcused tardies to school. We did that. HERO did that for us. You see it was substantial in the reduction of unexcused tardies. Those students, however, who had 4 or more did not go down. But those frequent flyers that had 10 or more went down substantially, and that was tremendous. How are we going to address those unmet goals? We've already started increased administrative presence into departmental collaboration meetings. We have more distributed leadership and collaboration going on, and each department is creating their own action plan. So how do we assess the effectiveness of our own school processes? Well, that should ring with you as school process data. I do each year a faculty survey where they assess our school in a Likert survey. And how do we include all of our stakeholders? There's all the different things that I do to include all of our different groups in our data so that they all understand our data. This is also school processes, by the way. Some things that we do in the school, I do have a bulletin board so students can see our data. They can see what our goals are. They can see whether we met our goals and what our goals are for the year. And the bottom bulletin board is I do track our percentage of students with 0 discipline referrals, the percentage of students with 0 discipline referrals each month. And it's a little friendly competition among grade levels. So things like that to disseminate our data. Our ongoing challenges at our school, also process data, is increasing poverty rates of our students. That is a challenge. Our funding inequities, we are not a Title I school, even though we have the free and reduced lunch population to be. If we were a Title I school, we would have a lot more money to spend in helping some of those issues that we have. We do have some Title I schools in our district, but our county chooses to spend that money at the elementary and middle school level, not at high school. Increasing transience is a challenge for us. Public perception, we have a perception issue. As our system has transitioned, there is a public perception of some of the changes that have gone on, even though we still have great kids and great families in our school. And they're unfounded perceptions, but there is a perception issue there. And we have some transportation issues. We don't have kids that drive much anymore. Most of our kids have to take the bus. So stuff that we used to do before and after school, we can't necessarily do as much as we used to do. And so where do we go from here? Our plans are to continue those 3 high impact initiatives. We're still doing them this year. Because they're showing results at our school. Full implementation of professional learning communities. We call them SALT groups, subject area learning teams. And continued emphasis on standards-based classroom. That's Tier 1 instruction. If Tier 1's not working, then Tier 2 and Tier 3 certainly aren't going to work. And we're working towards a pervasive instructional framework. And we're doing data talks in mid-semester to talk about how we're doing data-wise. Instead of just looking at the lagging data, we're trying to look at data more in advance, that leading data, to know how we're doing. And so our mantra has become slow and steady wins the race, and we've continued to improve. So, questions? That's my data presentation. I know I kind of zipped through it, but I'm real interested to know your reactions about what you saw. First of all, let's talk about the types of data. Did you hear examples of all 4 types of data? Somebody talk to me.
I did see a lot of data. My first shock or my first thoughts were how we're gonna get all this data with like 1 week of school left. So it was just kind of like, whoa, this is a lot. It was a really great presentation. It told a lot about your school. But I guess when I was first thinking about it, I was thinking about data from maybe like 2 years, but you went back like 4 or 5 years sometimes.
And you may not have access to that kind of data, so I don't want you to think that. Yeah, I didn't mean to overwhelm you. So you can relate to the little the baby's lip going up and down now. Okay, so demographic data. Give me some examples of the kind of different.
So demographic data, I saw the demographics of the school as far as like the number of students that were African American, Caucasian, Asian, those type of things. I did see the student learner data when you talked about the EOC or testing scores. You had goals for where they were and where you wanted them to go.
Okay.
Perception data. I guess, I don't know what discipline fell. I guess discipline fell in their demographics. We talked about the number of referrals, and that would be your demographics, and improving the number of referrals and tardies to class and those type things.
Okay, and I kind of skimmed over the slide that was most about perception data. The Likert survey that I gave my staff about collecting the data, but I didn't give all the data of what came from that perception survey. The school climate rating, that is perception data too. Okay, and then process data.
Process data, you talked about, I guess what you were doing. Well, I guess what were you doing to meet the goals? So you talked about the learning community, those type of things, and I guess the data was showing the goals were made. So
You also gave the amount of gifted classes, like the data on the gifted classes, special ed classes, and the ESOL classes, on their growth over the years in different areas.
Right. Exactly. So you did hear all types. Let's see, Tori. Did you see the data presented in multiple forms? Was
Yes.
most of it, was there both historical and snapshot data?
Yes.
Okay, give me an example that you saw.
So an example of the historical data, I think, would have been, you started at like 2014 up to 2017, and you looked at the data for like, I think you had like your science, you showed your biology, you showed, so like your content area improvements for that. But you also had for like your referrals for behavior and those types of things. And I saw where you had included, actually, I took notes on the PBIS
Okay.
intervention as one of your ways for implementing to show that progress from where they were to kind of get them to where you were showing those positives or the decline in,
Okay.
in
Good.
some of the things.
Excellent. Great. Stevie, talk to me about aggregate and disaggregate data. What did you see on the aggregate level, and what did you see on the disaggregate level?
Well, just with the graduation rates, and then you showed the difference in those, and then you broke it down into whether it took them 4 or 5 years. You also talked about the GPA of the students and the difference in the GPA between the students that were in your school system and also the ones that were moving into your school system.
Very good.
And you used the graphs, and it made it super easy to kind of figure out which ones you were talking about.
Okay. Betsy, talk to us about the graphs that were used. Did you think that by and large the graphs were easy to understand? Were any of them difficult to understand? What did you think?
Sorry, started talking without unmuting.
It's okay.
For me, the line graphs were easier to understand than the multi-bar graphs.
I agree.
Now, the bar graphs that were just single items, like the students who went from failing ever so many classes to not so many, that one was easy to read. But when we had trying to put 4 skinny little bars of different color all beside one another, those became a little difficult to read. There was probably a better way
I agree.
to show that, but it was nice to break up all the line graphs. So, you know.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to anybody else. Anything else that you saw that kind of jumped out at you in this data presentation? Any reaction?
Some of the line, I think sometimes it was going so fast that it was kind of hard to look at the line graphs. I guess if we actually had time to sit down and really look at it, it was like by the time I kind of got the understanding what subject it was or the year and all that, because there were sometimes they were kind of like piled right on top of each other.
Okay, and I understand, especially like when I gave the put multiple lines on the same graph. I typically wouldn't have done the presentation this quickly. I would have explained more of what was there. You will have access to this whole presentation if you want to look back at it as an example for you and how you would explain it. So that's a very good point. And I want to know, did it tell a story? So let's see, who have I not picked on recently? Candy, talk to me about the story that was told. Did you hear a pervasive story there?
Yeah, it told a story about how your school's going through change,
Mm-hmm.
and how you're using the data to drive that change.
Okay.
And the only thing is that I guess when we're doing this, we need to make sure that we're not overwhelming someone with all the data, because you can get too much data and kind of the story gets lost. Because
Okay.
at times I got lost, and I was, and trying to see the relationship between some of the pieces.
Sure.
And so then you have to stop, and I had to stop and step back and go, oh, okay, this piece does relate to this, or this is how this is tying in. And so sometimes I think you have to give a little more explanation or interject how you think the data relates, how you think the pieces go together, because a lot of times we get so inundated with data every day. I'm a special ed self-contained teacher, so
Bless you.
my level of data is so much all day. I take data every day, all day long, and so I myself have to stop and take a break and sit back and go, okay, I need to take and compile all this, and I have to put it into a story about this one student so someone else can interpret it. And then I usually have someone else have to look at it and read it and see if they get what I get out of it.
Okay. Good. Very, very good points. I agree with you completely about not overwhelming. And yours won't be on this scale, and so you'll be able to kind of control what you pull together to tell your story. Kevin, talk to me about, was there anything that you saw that was kind of used as an analogy that kind of helped tell the story?
I'm going to go back to your PBIS just because we're a PBIS school also. Your analogy of how it's going up into some of the different aspects that you're doing so that you could relate to why you didn't meet some of your goals. Using an analogy of, okay, yes, we know that our snapshot says we have this many referrals. However, that was an expectation of us. Or you go to your analogy of your new math program that you are using and not meeting your goals, because it takes adjustment for every teacher and every student when you go into a new program. And then you follow that up with, now that I have the data, I can then tell you that we did meet our goal for 2017.
Okay.
So you were showing multiple different analogies as you go through, and then even comparing some of your demographics and seeing the trends. It was very easy to follow from a data perspective. I'm sure if you were going slower through it, like some of them were saying, it would have been even easier to get the relationship So I understand that aspect.
Sure. But I didn't think you'd want to sit here till 10 or so. So we
No, sir. I'm all right without doing that.
I get you. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You're good points. Beth, talk to me about was there any metaphors? Did I create a metaphor of any sense to help me tell the story? Or did I relate it to something that you were kind of surprised to see in a data presentation that kind of became a metaphor for school improvement for us?
Yeah, it's not really a metaphor. It's not a metaphor at all. But the one, I mean, I guess. So I was interested in the physical component that you were talking about, how you were in like an older building, but there's plans for improvement. And just so like the space situation is so different for me being down south. I've been told that modulars are normal, but there's this whole like physical component to my school, and I'm just wondering how it's going to affect my life and like who they put out in the trailer and things like that. But I wanted to hear more about what the plans are and how space is going to reflect, 21st century skills, and like, are you guys going to be putting in different sorts of like tables instead of desks? I don't know. Like I sort of went there and like, is that kind of a metaphor for change?
Okay.
Not really a metaphor, but I was
Okay.
sort of interested in the physical space and what's that going to look like. And then sort of like preserving, it sounds like your building's old, and sort of preserving tradition and things like that. I don't know. That caught my attention. I wanted to hear more about that.
Okay. Interesting. I appreciate that. It's good. Anything else? Any other reactions that are burning that you just want to share right now? I don't want to cut anybody off about what you saw.
I did want to say that it looks like the data helps you be strategic in your planning for improvement. And like you said, you focused on little steps towards progress. So it's like we had a goal to focus on this for this year, and we see improvements from this. So we got to, basically on this data, we're going to focus on this, this, and this. So like when you were talking about the cross-curriculum writing and everyone using this particular strategy, like that's very strategic in working on getting EOC scores up, and like you got the buy-in of your staff to do that, to actively implement, right? That
Well, I smile because no, I didn't necessarily have all the buy-in of my staff, but they did it because I told them they had to.
Right. But it worked, and I think, like in hindsight, they saw that now I understand why we do it. So just being strategic and actually having that plan in place based upon the data, like you actually utilized it, you can see that the improvements are there.
Yeah, and that relates perfectly back to our discussion about John Cotter, because and one thing that we did I wish I had brought those scores, because our 9th grade ELA scores were almost 90 the next year. After American literature was 88 the next year, which was a tremendous jump, and I'm sure it's because of the work that we did in ACES writing strategy. That became a wonderful time for us to celebrate that achievement. So even though we hadn't gotten to our total goal, it gave us a time to celebrate that, and then more people bought in because they said, okay, I see how this is working now, and this is why we're doing this, because our achievement scores are so much better. And our DBQ scores, our document-based writing scores in our AP classes went up because kids had this strategy to use. Every time they sat down to write, they knew they were going to have to use that acronym of ACES for ACES, and it works. I mean, it works. It's evidence-based, and so it's good stuff. Any other reactions before we move on? We're almost done. We're wrapping up. I promise. Kevin's yawned 3 times in the last 3 minutes, so we're going to be done. Just playing with you. Okay, so let's remember let's look ahead, and that this project, remember, is not a project that you're going to do this week. Okay, so I don't want you to be overwhelmed. It is created in 4 steps over 7 weeks. That the data hunt, which is what we'll do first, is the next 2 weeks. Data visualization, weeks 4 and 5, school improvement planning 6 and 7, and then a final presentation in week 8. So I don't want to overwhelm you. So what you're going to do for this week, the big project for the next 2 weeks, is to go on a comprehensive data hunt for your school. Now I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint for a second, and I'm going to pull up a, let's see what you're saying. Let me pull up on my screen. I have so much on my screen now, it's almost too much to look at. Oh, here we go. Okay, let me share my screen with you again. Come on. This is the graphic organizer that you will use to catalog the data you found. I'm not asking you to collect the data, disaggregate the data, or anything like that right now. I just want you to make me a list of all the data that you can find. So spend time going through your CCRPI online. Look at your school's report card. You can do a lot of it yourself online, but then you need to sit down with that key person in your school and figure out what data is available. Under repository, you will write where would you find that data? Is it in your student? Is it in your SIS, your student information system? Is it in the CCRPI? Is it in other repositories that you may have in your school? What type of data is available there? So you're just creating a list, a cataloged list of what you can find. What years are available? So historical data. Is it available from, if it's milestones data and we started the milestones in 2015, do you have data from 2015 to 2017? You may have some 2018 data now. It's coming in now, depending on whether you were an EOC or EOG school. Is that data aggregate or disaggregate or both? Your answer could be both, okay? And then what type of data? This is where you relate it back to Bernhard. This is perception data. This is student learning data. This is demographic data. This is et cetera. Okay, so this is going to just be a list of the data that is available. And I do want it to be a comprehensive list. So you see lots of blanks there on purpose. You've got 2 weeks to gather this data together, because then you will start to decide, I'm not going to expect you to use all of this data in your project. Right now, you're just looking to see what is available, what can I pull, and then when you start doing your school improvement process, you'll decide what data is most important for you to use to tell the story that you decide you want to tell about your school, okay? Are there any questions about what that big hunk of the final project is for you to do over the next 2 weeks? I'm just such a good instructor that there are no questions at all. That was it. Okay, all right, well, I'll take it. I'll take it. I'm going to stop sharing that part of the screen and let me get back to my PowerPoint real quick. Okay, come on now. Stop share. I promise I'll get faster at this. It just takes a little bit of time. All right, and that is due Monday the 28th by 11:59 p.m. and you will put it, you'll submit it through Blackboard. Okay, just a look ahead, wrapping up. In this module, you will have a wrap-up assignment that basically will be your thoughts on how you're going to attack this project. That's your wrap-up assignment, and it is due this coming Monday, the 21st. You'll have 2 discussion posts, one for this week and one for next week. And the one for next week will open on Monday, and you'll do your data hunt. To prepare for our next synchronous online meeting, you'll have some reading that you'll have to do. It'll be in Canvas, you'll see it. And but one thing I want you to do is I would like you to locate a copy of, green copy, that makes no sense at all. Locate a copy of your school's improvement plan. So whatever your school does, and you don't necessarily have to print the whole thing, or just know where it is. Be able to access it on your computer. Sometimes you have it on your school's website. Sometimes your principal may have it. But whatever your school improvement plan or your strategic plan, please have access to that, because we will want to. I want to talk about those next time we meet in 2 weeks. So make sure you've got access to that copy, either in hard copy form or in digital form so that we can look at it, okay? That'll be the only special thing you need to bring to class in 2 weeks so that we can talk about how how data support your school improvement plan and how those SMART goals are written. So we'll talk about SMART goals a little bit too, okay? Any wrap-up questions? We might even be done 9 minutes early, so, you know, don't say I never gave anything. Any questions before we wrap up? All right, well, I certainly appreciate your participation tonight. It's going to be an outstanding class. I can already tell you're going to be a lot of fun to work with, and I look forward to learning a lot more about your schools. If you need me, you've got my cell phone number on the syllabus. Feel free to text me or call me if you need me or email me. Let me give you another email address. I don't check my Thomas University email every day, several times a day. But I do check my school email multiple times. So if you use the Thomas University one, if it's not an emergency, if it's an emergency, like you're going to have to miss class for some reason, either text me or email me at lane.daniel, L-A-N-E, .daniel, D-A-N-I-E-L, at mail, M-A-I-L, .fcboe, as in Fayette County Board of Education, fcboe.org. Lane.Daniel at mail.fcboe.org. And it's open on my computer at school all the time. So not that I sit at my desk very often, but but I will see it more often than I would see my Thomas University. Okay. Any questions, comments, burning things you need to share? All right. Well, I hope you all have a great evening, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Let me know if I can help you with anything. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.